Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Issei and Raynare change their mind and stay couple part 2. Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support and follow the Belial the Liar for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. Let's start this video. That's good, that's good. I'm glad you're feeling better. In fact, I'm so glad you're feeling better that I've decided you can go back to school tomorrow, no extra rest needed, Lisa said, giving Issei a thumbs up. The two of them were sitting with Raynare at the countertop bar in the kitchen of Issei's new apartment, talking about his medical condition. Oh great, school. Issei said with fake enthusiasm, waving his hands around sarcastically. He really wasn't eager to go back, especially if Mitsuda was still sore about being thrown around like a toy. I think you'll find it'll be a bit better now. After all, going to school with your lady friend should be oodles of fun, no? Lisa asked, grinning at him. Issei looked at Raynare, who was looking down and fidgeting with the hem of the dress she was still wearing. Yuma, you're going to school with me? He'd almost slipped in saying her name, but that wasn't important. How in the world had she arranged that? She'd been with him all day. I am, Issei. Neat, huh? She said, and smiled at him. He'd have to get the details on that later. More importantly, how had Lisa known? Issei glanced at her, but she had her usual aloof smile. He sighed. She knew everything, it seemed. Well, I'm glad you're both safe, anyway. Living with parents like that can be such a doozy. Lisa stood up from her seat at the bar, groaning at the strain. Well, I'll be heading on home now. I wanted to come make sure the two of you settle in alright. There's no toiletries or clothes or anything, really, so you'll have to buy your own stuff. Let me know if you need anything. I'm old and rich, if you haven't already guessed it. She said with a wink. Issei and Raynare stood and waved her out. She left with a parting shot. No Nephilim running around in the apartment, eh? She said, cackling. Lisa stepped out the door and left the apartment, leaving Raynare with a flabbergasted look on her face and Issei with a confused look on his. Nephilim? What's a Nephilim? Issei asked, looking at Raynare, who was glaring at where Lisa left from. That old lady knows way more than she lets on, Raynare said, shaking her head. Issei asked his question again. Raynare, what's a Nephilim? Is it something bad? Issei said. He truly had no idea what the old woman was talking about. Raynare looked at him and grinned. Issei, a Nephilim is the child of an angel and a human. Want me to give you one? She said in a sing-song voice and left her chair to walk over to Issei. He blushed and started to stammer as Raynare came over to him and sat on his lap with no warning whatsoever. Raynare. You see, can't just do that. He said. He spoke loud, but he wasn't yelling and he wasn't trying to get her off of him, so she stayed put. The chair they were on was big enough and Issei was more than welcome to get up if she was really bothering him, but he didn't do anything. She took this as a confirmation to stay exactly where she was, so she did. She sat on his lap and wrapped her arms around his neck, hanging on him like she was a kid. Issei. The day isn't even half over yet, let's go do something. Go out with me. She said, remembering how she asked him out last time and got denied. She hoped this time would be different. He'd already said he loved her, so it shouldn't be an issue. No. Issei said, looking her in the eyes. Her whole world turned upside down and her heart leapt into her. No. Did he just say no? But he said he loves me. What? Raynare's mind was moving fast, trying to figure out where she went wrong. Had it been her wings? It had to have been. Or maybe it was because she sat on his lap. No, what was it? Was it something she said? What was it that made him hate her? He looked her in the eyes. Slowly, before she could come up with a response, Issei took her hands in his, unwrapping her arms from around him. He cupped his hands around hers and held them tight, so she'd never leave. She looked like she'd shatter at any second, and neither of them so much as breathed. Raynare was terrified. But when he spoke, all her fears washed away. Raynare, I love you. Will you go out with me? Issei said, not stuttering on even a syllable. She started to laugh. The relief was visible on her face. Issei was sure she'd be mad at him for his little joke, so he started to explain himself. Well, I messed up last time, so I figured I should do it right this time. So, I'm going by the books and confessing my feelings, then asking you out. That's how it should be, right? He was answered by Raynare throwing her arms around him again and kissing him on the lips. When she pulled back, there was a tear in her eye. She was so happy it hurt. Of course I'll go out with you, dummy. But don't you ever, she said, narrowing her eyes and tightening her arms around him, ever scare me like that again. I thought you hated me. I was so scared, she said, and loosened her grip. He hugged her back and pulled her close. He whispered in her ear. I already told you, Ray. I could never hate my angel, no matter what. I love you, I really do. On the inside, Raynare was squealing. His words made her giddy with joy and she could hardly contain herself. Somehow, this boy always knew what to say to turn her into putty. She left his lap and stood up, turning around so he couldn't see her massive blush. If he kept going, she'd consummate their love right here, with or without his permission. Let's go shopping. You need some clothes and some stuff for the house. Raynare suggested, changing the topic. Issei stood up too, stretching. That's a good idea. Should we go now? He asked. Let's go a bit later. I need to take a shower since I didn't get one this morning. I'll go take one. You're welcome to join me if you'd like. Raynare teased, adding a swing to her hips as she walked towards the master bedroom. I think I'll pass. Issei stammered, fighting off a blush. She giggled and went into the bedroom. The room had a king-size bed facing a large TV hanging off the black and white walls and a nightstand on either side of the bed. There was a small table with 2 chairs next to a huge window with a gorgeous view of the city and a bookshelf on the other side of the room. There was a door on one side of the room which led to the master bathroom, which is where Raynare was headed. She entered the bathroom and began to take a shower. Issei, on the other hand, was hit with a wave of fatigue. He decided to go take a nap and wait for her to get out of the shower. He entered the bedroom, laid down on the large bed and closed his eyes. He was asleep in seconds. When Issei opened his eyes, he saw was fire. Memories of the dream from earlier that day came rushing back to him and he looked for the dragon. If he could just talk to the dragon again, he could get that power, the power to change the world. He wanted it. He called out for the dragon, desperately trying to find it. Hey. Dragon. Where are you? Issei yelled. He wanted nothing more than to speak with the dragon again, to take the offered power. He didn't have to wait for long, though. The dragon's massive head appeared from behind the wall of flames, making Issei sigh in relief. Oh? You were shaking in your boots earlier and now you're happy to see me? Well, that's quite the switch. It's only been a few hours though I can tell a change has taken place in your mind. Perhaps it was my fault. Maybe. Maybe not. So, what do you want, human? The dragon asked, curious. Issei inhaled and steeled himself. He had a feeling this would be harder than he thought. I want power. He yelled. The dragon chuckled. They all do. Fine. If you want it so bad, then come take it. The dragon boomed and brought out the gauntlet again, right in the middle of his clawed hand. He held it out for Issei to take, but once again, Issei couldn't move. He was kept still by an unknown force. No. No, damn it. I want it. Issei screamed in his own mind and began to struggle forward, extremely slowly. Whatever was keeping his body in place hurt him every time he moved, but it was bearable. He moved slowly towards the gauntlet, not stopping even for a second. As he neared it, his breathing became ragged and his body ached. He was in more pain than he'd even been in, but he was almost there. Give me that power. He yelled and lunged forward into the dragon's claw. He touched the gauntlet and a flash of green light filled his vision. The dragon's laugh filled the space around them. Wahaha. Well done, very well done. Not many can make it on only their second try, but I see you're a cut above the rest. Very well, I'll give you my power. Issei Haidu, my name is Drake, your partner. From this day forth, you are the Red Dragon Emperor. The green light died down and Issei could see again. He was standing on the dragon's open claw, able to move freely once more. Nothing had changed, save for his left arm. Upon it was a crimson gauntlet with 2 green gems set in the hand and forearm. 2 large golden spikes jutted out at the elbow, and spikes of the same color as the gauntlet dotted the whole thing. Issei moved his arm around, examining it. He didn't feel any different. He certainly didn't feel like he could change the world. What is it? He asked, looking up at the dragon. The dragon looked down on Issei with contempt in his massive reptilian eyes. I see they don't teach you children anything useful these days. That, my dear boy, is the gauntlet of the Red Dragon, the boosted gear. It has the power to double your strength every 10 seconds, with your body as the only limit. Drake explained, taking pride in his power. Issei listened intently, wanting to understand every bit of this new power. Double my strength every 10 seconds. Seems kind of ridiculous, honestly. Issei thought. If your base power was defined as a 10, then after 10 seconds it would be 20, and after 10 more it would be 40, and 10 more after that would make it 80, and so on. After 2 minutes, you'd have a base power of 40,960. That's insane. Even a child would be overpowered when equipped with something so powerful. And? I might have done that math wrong. Don't hate me if I did. Unbeknownst to Issei, Drake could hear his every thought. Ha. It's quite powerful, Well, that power is now yours to command. You'll have to train rigorously to be able to use its full potential, naturally, but you shouldn't have a problem with that. Now I think you'd better wake up, you're about to have a very worried fallen angel on your case. Braig said, using his other claw to wave goodbye to Issei. Issei waved back and all his vision went dark. Raynare walked out of the bathroom with nothing but a towel on, hoping to surprise Issei. She did not expect him to be in the bedroom. She did not expect him to be taking a nap. And she did not expect him to have the gauntlet of the Welsh dragon on his arm. Raynare covered her mouth with her hands and tried not to cry. This would make things so much harder. Now, they'd not only have to contend with Kuo, they'd have to worry about the White Dragon Emperor, too. Raynare knew the White Dragon Emperor of this generation, and she knew without a doubt that Issei wouldn't stand a chance. That guy was a powerhouse. She'd been hoping it was anything else. Even the damn true Longinus would have been better than the boosted gear. Issei was soon not the right kind of person for such a battle-hungry sacred gear. He wasn't a fighter. Raynare sat on the edge of the bed and buried her head in her hands. How could this happen? Their life together was just getting started and here it was already going to end. Maybe she could hide him. No, the White One would already know about his awakening. What am I going to do? Raynare thought. She looked at Issei's sleeping form. He was totally serene, and the only sign he was alive was the constant rising and falling of his. Raynare was overcome all at once by both an unbearable sadness and a strong desire to protect him. While she was powerful, she was nowhere near the unbridled power of the Red Dragon, and Issei would soon be the one protecting her. Until then, though, she would keep him safe. She promised herself she'd protect him. To that end, she needed to get rid of Kuo. So, she decided to call Azazel, leader and governor of the fallen angels, and report Kuo for his treachery. She stepped out of the bedroom. Azazel? Raynare asked. She was using a communication magic circle. That's me. I hope this is something important, I was right in the middle of some research. The governor said, impatient. Oh, it is. Vital, I'd say. Can you come to me within a few minutes? Raynare asked, hoping he'd say yes. I suppose. This better be worth my time, Raynare. Thank you Lord Azazel. She dispersed the magic and returned to Issei. He was sleeping so soundly, she almost didn't care about the gauntlet on his arm or all the pain it would bring the two of them. She kneeled down beside his spot on the bed and gently caressed his face. He slowly opened his eyes. As soon as his eyes opened, the boosted gear vanished like it was never there. Hey, beautiful. He said as soon as he saw her. She bit down on the smile that immediately fraught to her lips and remembered what she had to do. Issei, you've got to get up. We're going to have company here in a bit, she said softly, brushing the hair out of his eyes. He groaned and sat up. He realized what she was wearing and jumped halfway across the room. Raynare, what are you wearing? Issei yelled, averting his eyes. He was blushing intensely and wouldn't look in her direction. She giggled and decided to tease him. Issei, you just called me beautiful and now you won't even look at me? Gosh, how awful are you, she said and began to fake cry. Issei was at her side in an instant, though he made sure his eyes were tightly shut. I didn't mean it. I just he said, trying and failing to get his point across. She giggled silently so he wouldn't hear and decided to crank it up a notch. Fine. I'll change. Raynare went to her bag and loudly opened and closed the zipper, making it sound like she was retrieving her clothes. In reality, she just took off her towel, leaving her wearing nothing but a smile. Okay, you can look now, she said and struck a pose. Issei sighed in relief, then opened his eyes. Wah! Issei shouted random nonsense and immediately fell down onto the floor. He covered his eyes with his hands as fast as he could, but he'd definitely still seen her. He stuttered and stammered, trying to apologize and ask why she'd done that, but he couldn't form any coherent words. Raynare was laughing, but she felt a tad guilty. She knew he wouldn't be able to handle seeing her. She walked toward him, slowly. Come on, Issei. I can't be so ugly you'd cover your eyes instead of looking at me, right, she said. She crouched down by him and threw him into a hug, still. Raynare, what are you doing? He could feel everything. He wasn't necessarily complaining, but he sure wasn't comfortable with the situation. I can feel them, Raynare. You gotta get off. He yelled, but he didn't thrash around. He was worried that if he tried too hard to shake her off, he'd hurt her. She knew it too. It made her hug him even tighter. That's the point, dummy. You're supposed to feel them, she said in a seductive voice. Issei exhaled and stopped struggling. He forced himself to calm down. Raynare, didn't you say something about company? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. No sooner than the words left his mouth, the doorbell rang. Raynare begrudgingly let go of Issei, who sprang up as soon as he was free. I'll go answer that, Issei said and practically sprinted to the door. Raynare was left on the ground, but she had a grin on her face. I love that boy, Raynare thought. He'd not only tried to spare her modesty, but even when he was uncomfortable he refused to do anything that might hurt her. Issei opened the door and standing outside in the hallway was a tall man, dressed in a sport jacket without a tie. His undershirt and jacket were unbuttoned and his was visible. He looked at Issei like he wasn't what the man was expecting. "Who might you be?" the tall man asked. Issei was confused. "Who knocks on your door and then asks who you are when you answer? That's not how it's supposed to go." "I'm Issei Haidu, I own the penthouse. Can I help you?" Issei said. Truthfully, he was kind of worried. The man looked like he could cause problems if he felt like it. "Yeah. Is Raynare in there?" the man asked, looking past Issei. He didn't answer right away, he was lost in thought. He knows Raynare? Does that mean is he an angel too? Issei wondered. "Say, kid, where'd you get that ring?" the man asked, his attention suddenly back on Issei. He was looking at the ring on Issei's finger with no small amount of curiosity and it made Issei nervous. He moved the hand with the ring on it behind his back. "Oh, good. You're here." Raynare came up from behind Issei and greeted the man at the door. Issei stepped back so she could talk to him. Thankfully, she was dressed again. She was wearing a black long-sleeved t-shirt and blue jeans. "Hi Raynare. So, what's so important?" "I was in the middle of some fascinating research on the past wielders of the boosted gear. Really neat stuff. Did you know one of them managed to kill two of the white ones in a single lifetime? Incredible," the man said and stepped into the house. He spoke like Lisa did, with very little pause in his words. "Speaking of which, have you located the red dragon of this generation yet?" Raynare asked. Issei blanched. Were they talking about him? "They're talking about us, yes. I'm assuming the man doesn't know, though I know for a fact the girl does. She saw you with the boosted gear out while you were asleep." The voice of Drake spoke into Issei's mind, startling him. "No, I haven't. I know he'll awaken soon, though, if he hasn't already," the man said. He made himself at home and plopped down on one of the couches in the main room. "I know why you haven't found him," Raynare said in a very matter-of-fact voice. "Why's that?" the man said, gaining an edge to his voice. He didn't like when people knew something he didn't. "Because he's right here," Raynare said and gestured to Issei. Issei looked at Raynare like she was crazy, while she only grinned back at him. The man looked at him with a newfound curiosity. "Well, cat's out of the bag. Might as well introduce ourselves," Drake said to Issei. The man stood back up and went to shake Issei's hand. "Issei, was it? Well, good to meet you. My name is Azazel and I'm the leader of the fallen angels." They shook hands, but Issei's mind was racing at 1,000 miles per minute. "Leader? Of the fallen angels? Wait, fallen? That only makes sense, her wings are black so he's her boss, then wait a second, the Azazel from the Bible. You do not have to shout in your own head. It's louder than you think in here, kid. Be good to meet you, Azazel." "So, what are you here for?" Issei asked, curious. "Well, I came to see what your girlfriend wanted, but now I'm staying because you're the red dragon and because you've got the ring of Solomon on your finger." Issei went pale. This was the ring of Solomon. The one King Solomon used to make demons build his temple. He looked at it with a new admiration. "From that reaction, I'm guessing you didn't know about it. Well, here's the short version. That ring can be used to control devils. I'd like to take it, but I figure I'll let you hang on to it. Anyway, that's not why I'm here." "Raynare, what did you want?" Azazel said, looking to Raynare. "Belial has defected. He's planning on starting a war by killing the sisters of the Satans here in Kuo," Raynare said, not missing a beat. Issei had no idea what either of them were talking about. That's grave news. Very well. I'll dispatch one of my people to take care of it. Now Raynare, you realize, if this turns out to be a lie, it's your head that rolls, right?" Azazel asked, drawing a line across his neck. Issei did know what that means, but he knew he wouldn't let anyone kill Raynare, ever. "He won't touch her," Issei said, glaring at Azazel. The man chuckled, then turned to leave. Right. I'd like to speak with you again, Issei Haidu. You're going to be a very interesting person, I can tell already. I'll see the both of you some other time. Peace," Azazel said, leaving. The door closed behind him and Issei let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "Did you just threaten the Governor General of all fallen angels for me, Issei?" Raynare cooed. She approached him and hugged him from behind. "Of course. No one's taking you from me, not now, not ever. You're stuck with me, Ray," Issei said, with a fire in his eyes. He turned his head to look at her. She had a tear in her eye. "You're the best, Issei. Let's go shopping. I need to shower first, too." "Oh, good. I'll help you." "Wait, no. Raynare. Don't struggle so much, Issei. We'll never get you out of those pants like that." Issei groaned. "Why am I carrying all these bags, exactly?" he asked. Issei had, in his arms, no less than 10 bags of varying items from Kuo's mall. Raynare smiled. Because, sweetie. How can a sweet and vulnerable girl like me carry all those heavy bags? I might hurt myself. Raynare said, feigning weakness. She fanned herself with one hand while she talked, giving the impression that she couldn't be bothered. Issei scoffed. Vulnerable, right. Why am I carrying your stuff, anyway? Weren't we supposed to be shopping for me? Issei complained. He wasn't normally the whiny type, but the weight of all Raynare's packages was starting to hurt his back. He considered boosting himself for the very first time just to get some help in carrying it all. Don't worry, Issei, I'll make it worth your while, Raynare said, whispering. A blush spread out over his face, and he looked away. He pass. He muttered, shifting under the weight of all the packages. Raynare smirked. He was too cute. They walked closely together in Kuo's only shopping mall. So far, Issei had one bag, with some shirts in it, and Raynare had several, all with various clothes and shoes. Issei had offered to pay several times over, but Raynare had never let him. So where to now? Issei said. Despite his situation, he was enjoying spending time with Raynare. Even with how close they were now, the fact remained. They had only known each other for a handful of days. So, he relished every chance he got to spend time with Raynare, in the hopes he'd learn more about her. I'm not sure. Want to help me pick out some underwear? Raynare cooed, leaning into Issei. He stumbled when she spoke, and it took everything he had not to drop the packages. He blushed like mad and looked away from her. She took the opportunity and whispered directly into his ear while his back was turned. I'll wear anything you pick, she said, playing on his timidity. That was the last straw. Issei tripped and fell over, dropping the bags all over the floor in the middle of the mall. Raynare giggled but helped him up. His face was beet red and he wouldn't look her in the eyes, but he had a meek smile. They picked up the bags and this time, Raynare took her fair share. Issei was glad for the help but couldn't help feel a little emasculated. He was also the slightest bit embarrassed at having fallen on his face in the middle of a mall. They walked on, in relative silence. It was only about half a minute later when Issei's stomach growled, loud. I guess we never did get to eat anything, huh? Raynare said, thinking. It had been one hectic morning, with Issei getting kicked out of his house, receiving an apartment, meeting Azazel, and everything in between. They'd never eaten breakfast, and it was about noon. They were both hungry. Sorry. I guess not. Issei said. He was mildly embarrassed that she heard his stomach growling, but glad she didn't make a big deal out of it. Well, where should we go? It is our first date, so choose wisely, Raynare said, winking at him. Issei blanched. First date. She was right, of course, but he hadn't even thought about that since earlier when he asked her out. This revelation brought on a whole new level of anxiety to Issei's mind. What if he chose wrong? What did she even like? Were angels vegetarians? What if he picked wrong? He didn't know. I'm messing with you, Issei. Let's get something cheap at the food court, Raynare said, smiling. He sighed in relief. Of course Raynare wouldn't do something as trivial as make him freak out over where to eat. He'd only known her for a few days, but he had a feeling she wasn't very high maintenance. Though, with all the bags he was carrying, he couldn't exactly justify that feeling. Oh okay. You should pick. Issei said, wanting her to make the choice. She'd said something cheap, but how cheap was too cheap? What did cheap mean to her, anyway? Issei didn't want to be the one to mess up. He'd eat anything she picked, so he just let her decide. Sure. She said, then pointed out a Subway. Issei loved Subway, actually. No matter what kind of sandwich he got, he always enjoyed it. He gave her a thumbs up and they walked towards it. And? Before anyone says they don't have Subway in Japan, I'm going to tell you straight up. Yes they do. Before they got there, Issei felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned and Issei came face to face with a police officer. He immediately became nervous. He'd never gotten in trouble with the police or done anything illegal, but whenever he talked to police officers, he still felt like he'd done something wrong, no matter what. Raynare was slightly ahead of Issei, so it took her a second to notice that he'd stopped. Once she realized what happened, she became very worried. She knew what the officer was there for. Are you Issei Haidu? The officer asked. He stood almost a whole head above Issei and was solidly built. He had blonde hair and blue eyes. He didn't look unkind, but Issei was thoroughly intimidated despite both he and Raynare having supernatural powers. Why yes sir. Is something wrong? Issei said, stuttering. He was very nervous. A cop had singled him out. Something had to be bad. If Issei was nervous, Raynare was a wreck. He didn't notice because he was looking at the cop, but Raynare was almost breaking down. She hadn't expected the police to try and contact Issei so early. She was worried about what his reaction would be, and rightfully so. He might have hated his parents, but he was a kind person and wouldn't be happy with her for murdering his father, even if she hadn't done it directly. She began to regret the action. What the hell? I've killed people many times, why is this time different? Why am I guilty? She was very confused by the swirl of emotions. She'd almost never felt guilty, other than one other time with Issei, and that was about it. She wasn't even guilty as she ordered the mother to kill her husband, so why was she now? Raynare was beyond conflicted. Issei wasn't faring much better. My name is Officer Yoshikage. I've got some bad news, son. You might want to sit down. Or, we can go to the station and I'll explain everything there. Up to you. The officer said, gesturing to Issei. Issei was frightened. What had happened that was so bad? He pulled one of the food court chairs under himself and sat down. He gave the officer a solemn nod and the officer continued. Well, here's what happened. I'll go as quickly as possible, so try and stay with me. Earlier this morning, we received a call from your stepmom and she was hysterical. She had just murdered your stepfather and she was turning herself in. When we got to the scene, she was ranting about an angel telling her to do it. We don't really know what she was talking about and we can't ask her because she killed herself with a sword as we attempted to apprehend her. I'm sorry. The officer hung his head. Issei was numb. His stepmother had killed his stepfather. An angel. An angel told her to. No, it couldn't be. Raynare. Issei turned to Raynare, slowly. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I'll be right over there if you need me. Officer Yoshikage dismissed himself to a table nearby, leaving the two alone to talk for a moment. Issei's mind was whirling. He was feeling so many different emotions that he couldn't even begin to express himself. Happiness, guilt, anger, grief, remorse, relief. He was happy that they got what they deserved. He felt guilt that he was happy someone died. He was angry that they died before he could have some kind of revenge. He felt grief over the fact that his last bit of family, regardless of how distant they were, was now gone. He was remorseful that he had been so rude to his stepfather when last they spoke, no matter how much he deserved it. He was relieved that they were gone. But, most of all, he was hurt that Raynare had done something like that without telling him. She'd lied. She told him she went back inside to get something and she killed his parents. He wasn't mad at her. He hated them more than anyone could ever know. He wasn't sad that they were gone, not really. He was simply disappointed. How could she take two human lives so callously, without a care in the world? He didn't hate her, he wouldn't hate her, he couldn't. But he was hurting. He was hurting plenty. Raynare was terrified. She was absolutely beside herself with fear at how Issei would react. At that moment, she'd never regret anything more in her entire life. Issei would hate her for sure. She was shaking, and tears threatened to spill from her eyes. Issei, Raynare said, but trailed off. She didn't even know what to say. She was sorry. She was so sorry, but she didn't get the chance to tell him so. Issei turned and ran. Issei. She yelled and ran after him. The officer went to chase them, but he noticed all the things they'd left behind. He sighed. Yoshikage figured they could work it out, so he took the bags and started carrying them to his car. He'd load up all their stuff, then go after them. That way, they wouldn't lose anything. Raynare ran through them all, not caring who she bumped into. She had Issei at the edge of her vision, though he was steadily outrunning her. She was yelling for him, but he wouldn't turn around, no matter what. Raynare wanted to just unfurl her wings and fly after him, but that would cause several problems that neither of them could handle. So, she ran after him. Issei ran, he ran and ran and ran, all the way until he was out of the mall and away from all the people, all the voices, all the noise. He'd felt like he was drowning. He'd heard Raynare calling after him, but he didn't stop. Issei kept running, even after he'd left them all behind. He ended up in front of a fountain, all alone. He fell to his knees, gasping for breath. He'd never run that much in his life, not once. Issei sat back and just looked around. He was in a park, no one was around, and there was a nice fountain spewing water into the air. It was a little past noon, and the sun was bright in the sky. The grass underneath him was soft, and he laid back on it. His emotions were running rampant, but he just felt indifferent. Sure, his step-parents were dead, but did he honestly feel sad for them? No. Was he mad at Raynare? Yes, but not for killing them, just for doing something so important without even telling him. Raynare had lied to him. But that didn't matter. She'd already saved his life twice. Once when Mitsuda was beating him, and then again when he wanted to kill himself. So, he owed her more than he could ever repay. He still loved her, and she was still his angel. But, nevertheless, he was hurt. Issei laid on the grass for several minutes, just watching the fountain. He was overtaken by melancholy and couldn't bring himself to get up. What would happen to his step-parents' fortune? They were rich and had many priceless things inside their home, some of them rightfully his. Normally, he'd inherit everything, but since they'd disowned him, what would become of their wealth? He had no. He really didn't care about the money, he honestly wanted no part of their riches, but he would like his own things back, the things his original parents had given him. It didn't matter. He couldn't find it in himself to care about that or anything else at the moment. All he could think about was how sad Raynare looked when he'd looked at her. She'd been guilty, that was for sure, but he still didn't know how to feel about this whole thing. Regardless of that, he was sure of one thing. He still loved her, no matter what. Issei sighed. The sun had sunk lower in the sky without him realizing. He must have laid there for far longer than he thought, just thinking about things. Issei stood up, shaking himself off. He'd let Raynare worry long enough. Issei looked around, and he slowly realized that he had no idea where to go. He didn't have time to think about that for long, though. A voice made itself known from somewhere in the trees behind him. It was one Issei knew all too well, and it made his hairs stand on end. Well, look who it is, huh? Mitsuda approached Issei from deep in the brush. Issei was immediately on the defensive, but he was also preparing to run away at a moment's notice. He was terrified of the one who tormented him for so long, and he'd momentarily forgotten his own power amidst his instinctual fear. "Where's your little girlfriend, eh? Not here to protect you this time, shrimp," Mitsuda said, drawing ever closer to Issei. For every step the bigger boy took towards him, Issei took one back. He wanted nothing to do with Mitsuda. He remained quiet. "What, cat got your tongue? Hey, do you know what happened after you got taken away in the ambulance?" the bully said, stopping. Issei shook his head. "The cops came. Your bitch had tipped them off, and they came and arrested me. I almost got sent to juvie because of you. And now, you're gonna pay," Mitsuda yelled. He reached into the pocket of his pants and pulled out a switchblade knife. Issei's eyes went wide. Mitsuda started walking towards Issei again, but said one more thing. That was his fatal mistake. "After I kill you, I think I'll have some fun with that bimbo of yours. Nice tits she's got, huh?" Mitsuda said, licking his lips. Boost. Mitsuda was rewarded for his idiocy with a swift gauntleted punch to the face. Issei stood over a groaning Mitsuda, boosted gear on his arm, and a snarl on his face. He was pissed. Let it be known, Issei Haidu had almost nothing, but he was a very territorial person. He only had a few sparse possessions, but the ones he did have, he'd treasure forever. Not only that, he'd protect them with his life. And what was his greatest treasure? His angel, naturally. So, when some blockhead had not only insulted her, but threatened to rape her, what could he do but fight? Mitsuda swiped the knife at Issei's ankle from the ground, but Issei jumped back fast enough to avoid it. Mitsuda used the opportunity to stand up. He spat blood out and wiped his mouth. A nasty red welt was already appearing on the side of his face where Issei had landed a hit. "What the hell was that, shrimp?" "Bah, I don't care. You're mine," Mitsuda yelled and charged Issei. Boost. Issei was ready for him. The boosted gear's power had already made him 4 times stronger and faster than he normally was, and so it looked like Mitsuda was rushing at him in slow motion. Before Mitsuda could even raise the knife to stab him, Issei threw a wild and untrained haymaker right in his face. It connected hard and Mitsuda went flying backward several feet. "Stop this, Mitsuda. You'll only lose worse the longer this fight goes on," Issei yelled. He was high on both adrenaline and the power of the boosted gear, and restraining himself from decimating Mitsuda was proving to be a difficult task. If the boy kept coming, Issei wasn't sure he'd be able to resist beating him mercilessly. He wanted to, that's for sure. Mitsuda got off the ground, groaning. He stood on unsteady feet, but still he dropped into a fighting stance and held the knife tight. Issei sighed. This wasn't going to be pretty. Boost. Issei felt elated. He felt like he could punch a mountain to bits. He flexed his hands back and forth, admiring the ease with which he moved. Mitsuda, seeing Issei not even breaking a sweat, became enraged. He roared and charged Issei again. Issei looked up at the boy, who was moving even slower than before, and decided to end the fight quickly, before it went too far. As soon as Mitsuda was within range, Issei grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and threw him full force into a tree. He made a cracking noise when he hit the wood and fell to the ground, unmoving. Issei felt a sudden impulse to boost again and finish the job for good, but quickly fought it off. No matter what, he'd be the good guy. Otherwise, he was no better than the bullies. Issei walked over to Mitsuda and checked his pulse. He was unconscious, but alive and breathing. So, Issei started to leave. As soon as he did, however, a flutter of wings caught his attention. He looked up at the sky and saw a flash of black before Raynare's hair filled his vision. She'd thrown herself at him and he caught her in a tight hug. She was sobbing hard and he ran his hand through her hair. "Issei. You idiot. Don't you ever run off like that again. I was so worried," Raynare said in between sobs. She choked on some of the words and found it hard to talk with her heart hammering in her dot. He held her tight and put his hand on her head soothingly. Her wings were a cocoon for them and all they saw was each other. Instead of replying, Issei held her tighter and let her cry into his shoulder. She gasped and remembered what the situation had been earlier. She pulled herself off of Issei and started to apologize. "Issei, I'm so sorry. I was just mad at them for the way they treated you and for how they'd made your life so hard," and Raynare's vehement apology was silenced by Issei placing his index finger over her mouth in a SHH gesture. He started talking. "Killing someone for being a bad parent is definitely too extreme. Not telling me about it, that's pretty awful too. But, you know what? I really don't care. I forgive you, Raynare," he said and hugged her again. Raynare's whole world stood still. He'd forgiven her. An immense weight suddenly lifted off of her shoulders and it was like she could breathe again. She cried out in joy and leapt up into Issei's arms. He caught her, bridal style, and she captured his lips with hers. They stayed like that for several seconds, not even stopping to breathe. Reset. All the strength left Issei's body and he fell to his knees with her in his arms. She was startled, but he refused to drop her and with the last ounce of willpower he had, he set her back on her own feet before he completely collapsed. His face never hit the ground, however, as Raynare had already grabbed him. His boosted gear vanished back inside his soul. She lifted him to his feet and he put his arm around her shoulders so he could walk better. She'd read up on the side effects of the boosted gear, so she knew exactly what the reset meant. She withdrew her wings and suddenly she saw the bully passed out under a tree and she connected the dots. He'd attacked Issei, who'd been forced to defend himself and use the boosted gear for the first time. She was happy he'd held his own. This fight would make him more confident, or so she hoped. They didn't say anything else, just enjoyed each other's company. Well, in Issei's case, he was probably too exhausted to use his mouth, but Raynare was just enjoyed his presence. As they left the area, neither of them noticed Mitsuda's eyes glowing. They walked back to a main road together and it wasn't long before Officer Yoshikage had them in his car, headed back to their apartment. They thanked him for gathering their things and for driving them home. He gave them both his cell phone number in case they ever needed anything and then he'd left. Raynare carried all her packages to the apartment and Issei walked right beside her the whole way. When they finally got back inside, he'd collapsed in the bed. He'd already had plenty of sleep, so he wasn't really tired, but he was physically burned out. So, he and Raynare just laid in the bed together and watched whatever garbage they could find on TV and ordered pizza directly to the room to eat. They spent the rest of the day in complete peace. When Raynare opened her eyes, she wasn't greeted with the familiar sight of Issei's brown hair like she expected. She was alone on their bed and she quickly sat up to take stock of the situation. She looked around, scanning the room for any sign of her beloved. It was early in the morning and the sun was dawning over the horizon, making for a gorgeous view out of their apartment. Raynare stood up and left the room. She entered the main room and was relieved to see her boyfriend in the kitchen, wearing a white apron over his pajamas and standing over the stove, cooking something in a pan. He hadn't noticed her and she decided to mess with him. She quietly approached him and because he was too preoccupied with cooking and humming a tune, he didn't hear the soft patter of her feet on the tile floor. He didn't notice her at all until she threw her arms around him from behind, startling the life out of him. Issei practically jumped out of his skin but quickly calmed down once he realized who it was hugging him. Raynare laughed at his reaction and buried her face in the small of his back. He kept cooking and humming, but he now sported a large smile on his face. "Good morning, Ray. Sleep well?" Issei asked, glancing back at her. She kept her face in his back but answered through the fabric of his soft pajama shirt. "Of course. How early did you get up?" she asked, curious. "Only a few minutes ago. I would have woken you up, but you look so cute asleep, I couldn't do it," Issei said. He didn't hesitate or stutter, but he started blushing. Raynare blushed heavily too, but he couldn't see her face, so she didn't worry about it. She squeezed him tighter. "He's too sweet," Raynare squealed in her mind. Every girl loves being called cute by the one they love, no matter what. Raynare was hardly an exception, so when Issei called her cute without even knowing what he did, he'd already made her day. "What are you making?" Raynare asked, peeking out from behind him. "An American breakfast. Bacon, scrambled eggs, hash browns, and ham. Apparently people in the Western Hemisphere eat this stuff up, so I figured I'd give it a shot. I hope you like it," Issei said, refocusing on the food in front of him. The bacon was already finished, steaming on a plate near the stove, and the ham and eggs were cooking in the bacon grease. He had the hash browns cooking in another skillet, set away from everything else. "I didn't know you could cook, Issei. This is all very nice," Raynare said, stepping out from behind him and looking closer at the stove. Everything there looked professionally made. Well, as professional as eggs, bacon, hash browns and ham can get. Nevertheless, Raynare was impressed. Yeah, I pretty much had to provide for myself while I lived with my step-parents, so I got pretty good at cooking and cleaning and stuff like that," Issei said, rubbing the back of his head. He turned off the stove and moved the food onto serving plates. Raynare helped him set their dining table and they both sat down to eat. They ate in relative silence, both content to simply sit in each other's presence. Raynare would have made a move but figured Issei couldn't handle the say-on maneuver. Issei wanted to make a move but didn't know the first thing about how to do something like that. So, they both just sat next to each other and ate. "That was good. I'm happy you can cook, Issei." "I sure can't," Raynare said, leaning back in her chair, finished. Issei finished at the same time and wiped his mouth off. "Thanks. I bet you aren't that bad of a cook, right?" Issei said, looking at her with a renewed curiosity. He'd only seen bad food a handful of times and to him, it seemed trivial to prepare a good meal. He assumed Raynare would be a good cook. "I'm terrible. I once set a cup of ramen on fire, if that tells you anything," Raynare said, putting her head down in sadness. "How do you even do that?" Issei asked, genuinely curious. How could someone be such a bad cook that they burn what is quite possibly the simplest meal on the planet? It didn't seem possible. "I forgot to add water," Raynare said quietly. Issei started laughing. He laughed a genuine laugh, straight from his heart, and Raynare soon found herself joining in, despite her being the butt of their joke. After they both calmed down, Issei went to start washing the dishes while Raynare sat and watched him from her chair with one eyebrow raised. Issei noticed her staring at him weird and asked her what was wrong. "Is there something on my face?" Issei asked, checking his cheeks. Raynare giggled. "No, sweetie. I just can't figure out why you're washing the dishes when I can just do this," Raynare said and then snapped her fingers. A green magic circle appeared above the stack of dishes they had. All at once, each individual dish began to clean itself and then they all put themselves away. Issei watched, amazed. "That's so cool. Can I learn magic like that?" Issei asked, looking to Raynare in awe. She grinned and fanned herself with her hand like an old-timey noblewoman. "Isuppose. What's in it for me?" she asked, making seductive squinty eyes at Issei. He gulped. On my heart?" Issei asked, half joking. Raynare's grin fell off her face, replaced by an open-mouthed stare. Had he really just said that? A blush filled her cheeks as she tried to recover her facial expression. Issei didn't know what he said, but apparently it was the right answer. He mentally high-fived himself. "I'll take it. Now, shouldn't we get ready for school?" she asked, trying to change the subject. "I'll give you a magic lesson later," she added, seeing his face fall. Issei lit up at that and nodded quickly. Issei went into their room, got his school clothes, and went into the bathroom to change. Raynare changed in the bedroom and knocked on the door when it was safe for him to come outside. He left the bathroom and was greeted by the sight of Raynare now wearing the same green and red uniform as him. The girl version, of course. They both went back into the main room and sat down on a couch, waiting. They'd woken up too early to just go right to school, so they had a little spare time. A knock on the door grabbed their attention. Raynare quickly stood up and backed away while Issei slowly approached the door. He opened it and on the other side stood Azazel, looking as comfortable as ever in his suit. Issei breathed out a sigh of relief and stepped out of Azazel's way so he could enter the house. Raynare made a few noise and approached them both. Azazel waved at the two of them and walked inside. "What's up, Azazel? Why so early?" Issei asked. Raynare nodded, echoing his question. "Well, I wanted to come congratulate the two of you," the governor said, smirking. Raynare cocked an eyebrow and Issei tilted his head, suspicious. Azazel put his hands behind his back like he was hiding something. "What's the occasion?" Raynare asked, wary. "You've both been accepted to the most prestigious school in town, Kuo Academy," Azazel said, holding up two black and white uniforms that hadn't been in his hands a few seconds before. Issei's mouth dropped open. He'd wanted to go to Kuo, but his step-parents hadn't let him. The tuition was far more expensive and they didn't consider him worth the trouble. Raynare wasn't that surprised. She could have gotten them both in if she'd wanted to, but hadn't even thought about it. She was more interested to know why Azazel went through the trouble of getting them in. While Issei rushed forward to take his uniform from the man, Raynare hung back. "Why?" she asked, eyeing the governor general suspiciously. Azazel didn't seem like the kind of person to randomly do a kind deed unless it was beneficial to him. Azazel looked at her. Issei heard her question and stepped back from Azazel. He hadn't even considered that this could be some kind of ploy. He waited nervously for Azazel's answer to Raynare. Azazel sighed. "I should have known you'd be sharper than that. You caught me. I do need a favor from both of you and it does involve you going to Kuo," Azazel said, tossing Raynare her uniform. She caught it one-handed and pointed at him accusingly with the other. "Just what is this favor, exactly?" Raynare said. Issei examined his uniform closely, making sure nothing was odd about it. That requires a bit of explanation on my part. Okay, listen close. There's two pillar heiress devils going to Kuo Academy. Befriending them could be instrumental to achieving peace, so I'd like both of you to infiltrate the school and get good with them. Cool. Azazel spoke fast, leaving no room for discussion or questions. All of it flew over Issei's head. Devils are real too. Wait, is that what he was talking about when he said my ring could control devils? That's crazy. You know angels and dragons are real, and you didn't think devils were? Use that brain of yours, partner. Drake and Issei conversed within his mind, while Issei was reeling from the revelation that yet another supernatural race shared the world with him. That's less than I expected. Raynare said, considering. What he described seemed far too easy to warrant Azazel coming to their house himself and admitting them to a nice school. Though, if that was really all he wanted, she wouldn't make a fuss about it. Issei obviously wanted to go to the school, and if all she had to do was play nice with some devils, she'd tolerate it for him. How hard could it be, right? What, you don't trust me? Azazel asked, scoffing. Issei glanced at him with an eyebrow raised. Truthfully, he liked the governor, but was still a little miffed at his threat to Raynare last time they spoke. About as far as I can throw you, Issei said, mumbling. He hadn't meant for Azazel to hear him, but of course the fallen did. Is that before or after boosting? There's a big difference. Azazel said, a grin on his face. Issei blanched. Oops. He'd heard. The boy turned away, scratching the back of his head in embarrassment. Raynare jumped in. So is that really it? All you want us to do is make friends with the devils at Kuo? That's it? No strings attached? Raynare asked. Azazel sighed. Well, there is one other bit. The two girls are pillar heiresses, like I said earlier, but I didn't mention what pillars. One of them is Ria's Gremory, and the other is Sona Citri. Azazel said slowly, looking away from Raynare's penetrating stare. She glared at him. That's a minor tidbit. So, these girls are only the sisters of the rulers of hell, that's all. Raynare said through gritted teeth. She knew there was more to it than just being friends with a couple of random devils. Ria's Gremory is the heiress to the Gremory pillar and sister to Surzich's Lucifer, current Satan Lucifer of the underworld. Sona Citri is the heiress to the Citri pillar and sister to Seraphol Leviathan, current Satan Leviathan of the underworld. They were by no means just some random pillar devils. Getting close to the two of them would be dangerous, and not just a little. Raynare wasn't thrilled at the prospect of going to school with what should be two of her most dangerous enemies, but she did understand how it could lead to peace. What she didn't understand is why Issei needed to be friends with the devils. He wasn't affiliated with any of the three factions, and peace didn't really matter for him. You got it. So, I expect the two of you attend Kuo this morning instead of your other school, whatever it's called. Any questions? Azazel asked. Issei raised his hand. Issei, we're in your house talking face to face, and I just asked you if you had questions. You don't have to raise your hand, is what I'm saying. Azazel said, facepalming. Issei put his hand down and asked his question. Why do I need to be friends with the devils? Aren't they bad? Issei asked, unsure. Was I wrong to assume you were associated with our faction? Azazel asked, tilting his head. Raynare looked at Issei. She was also curious of his answer. Oh. I guess not, I didn't even think about that, honestly. No, I'm definitely on whatever side Raynare's on. That's for sure. Issei said with a serious expression on his face. Raynare's heart fluttered in her. Did he even realize what he did to her? Probably not. She hid her smile and fought off her blush, while Azazel gave her a knowing smirk. Well, that's good. No, but even if you weren't an honorary member of the Fallen Angel faction, you are the Red Dragon Emperor, and that makes you a faction all your own, basically. Yours is arguably one of the most important dispositions. If you were against peace, it would be well within your power to keep the war going. So, it'd be a good idea to build good relationships with the Devil faction, is all I'm saying. Any more questions? Azazel said and looked between Issei and Raynare, who both shook their heads. He'd just explained her only question to Issei, so she had nothing else to ask. Well then, I'll be going. School starts in a half hour, so you two better be there on time. I'll see you later. Azazel said, and they waved him out. Issei closed the door behind him and looked at his new uniform. This is awesome, he breathed out. Kuo was definitely a step above his current school, and he was more than happy to attend. Also, getting away from Mitsuda would be excellent. Raynare was mildly ticked. She'd gone through all the trouble of hypnotizing her way into Issei's school, only for Azazel to come and wreck things. She was happy that Issei would get to go to a better school, sure, but that didn't stop her from being annoyed with the Governor General. Not to mention, they had to befriend the little sisters of two of the most powerful beings on the planet. Raynare was frustrated, to say the least. I guess I'll go change, then. Issei said and took his new uniform back into the bathroom. Raynare took a closer look at the two pieces of clothing Azazel had thrown her. It was a white shirt with an attached black corset and cape and a maroon skirt. The skirt was scandalously short but she didn't really mind since Issei would be there. Raynare passed Issei and went into the bathroom to change. Once they were both changed, Issei locked up the apartment and they left together. Issei didn't really know how to get to Kuo, but Raynare told him it was easy and then grabbed his hand. A green magic circle appeared below them and teleported the pair to an alley right by Kuo Academy. "That's too awesome," Issei said, amazed. He'd only ever been teleported twice and it blew his mind when it happened. He turned to Raynare. "You've seriously gotta teach me how to do that," Issei said, coming close to her face. Raynare turned her head away. "Oh, I don't know, it's pretty HRO'd," Raynare said teasingly and trailed off. He grabbed her hands and held them in his. He had an excited look in his eyes and Raynare couldn't find it in herself to look away from him. "I'll figure it out. I bet you'd be a good teacher. Come on, show me how to use magic," Issei said, holding her hands to his. She blushed and looked away from him. "I suppose I could give you a lesson after school," she said. He let go of her hands and she immediately missed his warmth. "All right," Issei yelled and pumped his fist in the air. Raynare was content. That was one of the only times she'd seen him express happiness and she liked how he looked smiling. She thought about how he'd been not a week ago, so sad he could hardly stand it. Raynare couldn't bear to see him so depressed and she was beyond glad their relationship was having a positive effect on him. They left the alley and walked onto a nearby sidewalk. Issei looked around in mild awe. The part of town they were in was very nice and the day was gorgeous. Raynare wasn't as impressed, but she was happy that he was happy. As Kuo Academy came into view, Issei was mystified. The school was far larger than any he'd seen. It had 3 stories, windows all over, and several buildings separate from the school itself. It was more of a little town than a school, really. The school had an ornate brick gate and as Raynare and Issei went through it, they began to hear whispers of gossip from all of the other students pooling in. Raynare didn't particularly care about any of it, but Issei was another story. He listened intently to every scrap of conversation he could hear. "Who is that girl? She rivals Riaz and Akeno in beauty. Are they a couple? I'm jealous of him. Forget the girl, who's the guy with her? I've never seen him before, he's cute. I wish I was her. What's with that huge ring? I've never seen anything like it. Are they hitched? I ship it." Issei wasn't really sure who they were talking about. As for the girl the whispers mentioned, he assumed it was Raynare. But who's the guy they were talking about? Issei looked left and right, but he couldn't figure out what cute guy was around. Does he not know they're talking about him? He doesn't even realize how cute he is, does he? Raynare thought. She grabbed his arm and pressed herself into him so all the girls would know he was taken. She heard several huffs and one yell of disagreement, but Issei didn't seem to notice. He was too busy blushing while also simultaneously trying to avoid the death stare all the guys were shooting him. Unbeknownst to the pair, a gorgeous girl with crimson red hair and piercing blue-green eyes watched them from the second-floor balcony on top of one of the many buildings dotting the campus. Beside her stood her best friend, a fair and beautiful black-haired girl. "Who are those two, Akeno?" Riaz Gremory asked her queen, curious. The girl answered after a moment of thought. "I'm not entirely sure, actually. The boy is Issei Haidu, the girl is Yuma Amano. That's all I know about either of them, other than the fact they're both second years." Akeno Himejima replied. "I've got an odd feeling about one of them. I think he's got a sacred gear," Riaz said, staring at the boy from afar. She was too far away to feel their auras or anything like that, she'd need to be far closer to detect their actual power and species. The girl, Yuma, was pressing herself against him. If Riaz had to guess, it was to drive off other potential suitors. She felt a pang of jealousy. She wanted to love someone like that, but alas, she was stuck in her arranged marriage. "Akeno, tell Kaneko to keep an eye on them after school," Riaz said, not looking away from the pair. Akeno nodded and left the room. "Maybe you can help me," Riaz mumbled to herself. Back inside the school, Issei was having a bit of an issue. He attempted to go to class, only to find out he had no idea where his classes were or even which classes he had. Neither did Raynare. So, they both took a trip down to the student council office to speak with the president. Issei knocked on the door and the two waited outside for someone to answer. A shortish girl with glasses and very long black hair answered the door. Raynare was instantly wondering how and why she had her hair so long. Surely it had to get annoying. "Can I help you?" she asked, looking at the two of them. Her eyes darted to Issei's ring, but she didn't visibly react to it other than acknowledging it was there. Issei started to say something, but was quickly cut off by Raynare. "Yes, absolutely. We just transferred here and we don't know where to go or anything. Could you give us a hand?" Raynare asked, putting on her best clueless attitude. Issei followed her lead. Yeah, we really don't know where to go though, he wasn't nearly as good at lying as she was. The long-haired girl looked back and forth between the two of them and then down at Issei's ring. A brief look of surprise crossed her face and then was instantly replaced with stoicism. Of course. Come right in. She said and ushered the two inside the council office, closing the door behind them. Issei and Raynare walked in slowly, looking all around. A girl with a bob cut and glasses sat at a desk. A metronome ticked back and forth in front of her, instantly annoying Raynare. Issei didn't mind. The room itself was a large one, with navy-paneled walls and a large round table at the very center. The only people inside were the door girl, the desk girl, Issei, and Raynare. What can I help you two with? No, actually, before that, I have some questions for the two of you. The girl at the desk said, her head resting on her folded hands. Her mouth was hidden behind her hands, and when she talked, there was an accusing edge to her voice. What is a fallen angel and the holder of a holy relic doing in my school? The girl said, not bothering to mince words. No one became hostile, but Raynare and Issei were instantly on edge. How did you know? Issei said, wondering. He knew next to nothing of the supernatural world and was eager to absorb any information he could. Well, as for your holy relic, I can feel its aura from all the way over here. As for the fallen angel, she didn't bother to hide her presence, so the whole supernatural population probably knows she's here. Raynare winced. Oops. Well, we aren't here to start trouble, if that's what you're wondering. We just wanted to know how to get to class, Issei said, rubbing his head. The girl behind the desk stared at him from behind the lenses of her highly reflective glasses, sending chills down his spine. I believe you. Very well. I'll tell you everything you need to know in exchange for some information. And I don't just mean about how to get to class. You're obviously new to the supernatural world, so I believe we are in a position to be mutually beneficial to one another. So, information for information. Deal? The girl behind the desk asked, unmoving. Raynare finally spoke up. Deal. So, who are you? She asked, not wanting to waste time. They'd already be late to class, and on their first day no less. She frankly couldn't care less, but she knew it would reflect badly on Issei. My name is Sona Citri, president of the student council and heir to the Citri pillar. The person who let you in is Tsubaki Shinra, my friend and queen. She said, gesturing behind them to where the girl stood. Queen? Does she swing that way? Gotta keep her away from Raynare, Issei thought to himself. Drake sighed inside Issei's mind. Issei, queen has an entirely different meaning to devils. She's something akin to a general for Sona. Someone really needs to just sit down and explain everything to you within the near future. Drake trailed off, slightly worried for his newest partner's lack of knowledge. So, who are the two of you? Honest answers, please. I've no time for liars. Raynare and Issei shared a glance and they were both thinking of the same questions. Should they tell her everything? Would she be an ally or an enemy? She was one of the people they were supposed to befriend, after all. Raynare spoke first. Azazel sent us here to try and foster good relations with the devils of this school. He wants us to be a step towards peace. She said. She certainly wasn't about to lie on Azazel's part, not when he'd tossed them into the lion's den. Raynare also had a hunch that if she had lied, Sona would have caught it immediately. Sona nodded. That's good, but I'd already guessed that much. What I meant was, who are you two specifically? Sona said, tilting her head to the side. I'm a fallen angel, and he's a human sacred gear user. Raynare answered before Issei had a chance to. She did not want the devils to know he was not only the Red Dragon, but he was also unclaimed by a faction. He'd be like a piece of candy to them. A delicious, unowned, powerful piece of candy. What sacred gear, exactly? Sona said, unflinching. She knew the Fallen was trying to hide something, and she wanted to know what. Raynare flinched. Of course she'd want to know which one. Issei didn't know why she'd want to hide his sacred gear, but he knew to follow her lead. We'd like to keep some things secret if at all possible. He tried to be diplomatic about it, but lying was never his strong suit. Even if he wasn't outright lying, he was avoiding telling the truth and he lost his cool. Sona sighed. I suppose that's to be expected. I've only got one more question. Why in the world would you bring that ring here? Do you have a death wish? Sona asked, her face showing a flash of confusion for a moment before returning to complete stoicism. Issei looked at his ring, suddenly remembering the words of Azazel. Of course he shouldn't have brought it. If it really did what the Governor General said it did, it'd be like a weapon of mass destruction to the devils. And with two devils as high-ranking as this, it would be paramount to declaring war to bring the ring here. Issei felt like an idiot. He quickly took off the ring and pocketed it, a sheepish expression on his face. You might not believe me, but I totally forgot it was there, he said, fidgeting with his hands. Sona stared at him hard. Okay, fine. There's still a lot of blanks I need to fill, but I think you're both relatively safe and I agree with building peace. So, I'll let you say and give you your schedules and such. And, a word of advice she said and stood up from her desk. Tsubaki walked to her from her place behind Issei and Raynare and handed her a few papers. Sona looked over the papers briefly, nodded and then handed them to Raynare. Next time you walk into enemy territory, do it better than that. There's so many different ways you could have just started a war. Anyway, that's everything the two of you need at the moment. Let me know if you need anything else and be on your best behavior while you're here. She said and gestured to the door. Issei was reminded of his stepmother but quickly dismissed the notion. Issei and Raynare left and waved to the devils on their way out of the student council office. As soon as the door closed behind them, Raynare let out a heavy sigh. Issei looked at her, puzzled. Let's go to class. She said, smiling and holding up the papers Sona gave her. Issei wondered what the sigh was for but didn't question her on it. She was probably relieved it was over, just like him. She held the papers up and they both read them. They had each class together all throughout the day, which made both of them very happy. Raynare briefly wondered if someone had done that on purpose, but she doubted it. Just the luck of the draw, she guessed. They both walked to their first class of the day. When they got to the door, Issei knocked on it. A teacher came out to greet them. The teacher was a short, stocky old man with glasses, a brown corduroy jacket and a comb-over. A short explanation later and he was ushering them inside to be introduced to the class. He had a kind look on his face and seemed excited by the prospect of teaching new students. As Issei and Raynare entered the room, they were immediately greeted by the hungry stares of 20-ish teens, all eager to have some information on the school's favorite new gossip trend, the new couple. New couple is what they'd taken to calling the pair of new students, since no one knew Issei and Raynare's names yet. Well, class, looks like we have 2 transfer students joining us from now on. Well, go ahead and introduce yourself. The teacher said, light-heartedly. Issei already liked the man, even though he'd only known him for a couple of minutes. Raynare went first, naturally. Her inborn confidence far outweighed Issei's, growing though it was, and she went first after he shyly looked at her. My name is Yuma Amano. This is my super shy, super cute, super off-limits boyfriend, Issei Haidu. She said cheerfully, but with a noticeable edge to her voice at the last bit. The girls in the class, who'd been eagerly eyeing Issei, backed off at her introduction. Issei blushed and freaked out a little when she introduced him alongside herself. He hadn't wanted to go first, sure, but he also hadn't wanted her to do it for him. He also didn't expect her to introduce him as her boyfriend. That little tidbit had the boys in the class glaring at him like he was the only thing between them and Raynare. The thought made him want to laugh. She'd rip them to shreds if they ever tried to come between he and Raynare. He gave a little wave to the class. A couple of the braver girls eagerly returned it, earning them a glare from Raynare. Thank you, Miss Yuma. Issei, I hope you can warm up to us eventually. Alright, there's 2 open seats right over there, so let's get back to it. The teacher said enthusiastically, pumping his fist. Issei and Raynare sat at the seats he gestured to, both near a window, one in front of the other. Raynare sat behind Issei, if only so she could pick on him during class. They hadn't been in class for 15 minutes before Raynare was already bored. She'd taken to drawing circles on Issei's back with her finger and while it distracted him from paying attention, he couldn't say he didn't enjoy it. 25 minutes in and she had her head in his back, snoozing away. They sat at the very back of the room, so only a few students could see Issei's frenzied blush as his girlfriend slept on him. The ones that did were a couple boys that shot him a thumbs up. He looked away from them and tried to focus. 45 minutes in, she'd woken up and was still bored out of her mind. So, she decided to have a little fun. She licked the tip of her index finger and plunged it into Issei's ear. The boy jumped like crazy, though he didn't get completely out of his desk and somehow he managed to avoid drawing attention. He turned back to look at her, with an frustrated yet happy expression on his red face, and she blew him a kiss. He sighed, smiled, and turned back around to focus on the class. 7 hours of boredom and mischief later, and the two were walking home. That was so boring. Raynare yelled into the air, now that they were well away from the school. Issei chuckled. He scratched his cheek with his free hand, his other firmly in Raynare's grasp. I think you enjoyed it. Issei said. HMPH. I did enjoy one part. Leaving. She said, giggling. I knew it. You had fun, didn't you? Admit it. You had a fantastic time distracting me from classes all day. Issei said, poking her stomach. She laughed. He was being surprisingly forward today, not that she minded at all. Maybe a little, Raynare said, trailing off. They continued talking and laughing and flirting all the way home because it was a pretty day and neither of them felt like wasting it by teleporting instantly back to the apartment. If they knew someone was following them, they just might have. Kaneko Taoju, Ria's rook and the school's first-year mascot, trailed the two from nearby bushes. Every time they walked a certain distance ahead of her, she jumped to a new bush or tree. Luckily, the path they followed seemed ripe with vegetation, so she stayed completely undetected. She wasn't close enough to tell whether or not they were of a different species, but she definitely felt a holy aura. It's probably a sacred gear. Kaneko mused to herself. She decided she'd had enough of traipsing around and bushed and went to report back to Ria's. One or both of them was a sacred gear user. Once Issei and Raynare got home, they both flopped onto their bed. "So, how about that magic lesson?" Issei asked, looking at Raynare with excited eyes. She laughed a little. "Oh, I guess we can do some of the basics," she said in a teasing voice. 20 minutes, one failed magic lesson, and one misfired spell later. "No, I'm sure it's an easy fix," Issei said. I guess. I don't know how to replace a gigantic window, myself." Raynare replied. Issei sighed. "Me either. Lisa. He asked. Raynare sighed too. Lisa. You already broke something. Well, that's fine, I expected the two of you to have burned the place down by now, if I'm being honest. So, what's the amazing story?" Lisa asked, a grin on her worn face. Raynare and Issei fidgeted. Neither spoke. They hadn't gone over a story beforehand, and Lisa arrived far faster than they'd expected. They didn't really know what to say, and they obviously couldn't say Issei blew a hole in it with magic. Lisa pursed her lips. No one wants to talk, huh? That's fine. I'll just take a peek at the hole and see what I can come up with. Sound good? Good. She said, smirking. Issei got the feeling she knew they were hiding something. Lisa walked over to the large circular hole in the window, looking at it carefully. She examined it with all the careful deliberation of a practiced surgeon, which she was. A clean hole, no breaking. No glass on the ground, and the area around it is slightly singed. If it wasn't the size of a baseball, I'd say you shot it. It's almost like magic. Raynare and Issei both turned a little pale and shared a worried glance behind the woman's back. Was it possible she knew about magic? No, of course not. Did she? Well, I'm stumped. I'd like someone to tell me what happened, but it's not important. I'll send someone up within the hour to get it fixed, don't fret. Lisa said, turning back towards Issei and Raynare. They both sighed in relief. She raised an eyebrow at their behavior, but didn't press them. Thanks Lisa. I'm really sorry about this, Issei said, a little embarrassed. They hadn't even had the lavish penthouse for a week and he'd already broken a window. She waved him off. Bah, it's no big deal. Couple of young people like you, I'm surprised you haven't blown the place to smithereens yet. You've kept it remarkably clean and filled it with nice things, both material and immaterial. What more could a home have? Issei didn't really know what she meant. They had kept it clean and they'd bought some neat stuff for the place, but what in the world had she meant by immaterial things? What's that supposed to mean? Raynare asked, mildly curious. She didn't really understand Lisa words either. Well, a house isn't a home until it's filled with love, is it? Lisa said, a large grin on her wrinkled face. Issei immediately found something on the other side of the room to look at and Raynare fought down a blush. I guess not. Raynare said, looking down. She unconsciously reached for Issei's hand and he grasped her fingers within his own. Ha! You two are adorable. Lisa suddenly exclaimed, cackling. She moved past the two towards the door. Well, I'll be going now. Expect a repairman soon. Best of luck to the both of you. She opened the door and put one foot out, about to leave. Before she did, she stopped and turned back to the two of them. A bit of advice before I go. A little of my old woman's wisdom, if you will. This is for both of you, so listen up. Be careful who you trust. Not everyone has the best intentions all the time. Never know when someone might try to use you as a pawn. Maybe even someone at that new school you two are attending, Kuo. Well, that's all. Bye now. Lisa stepped out and closed the door. Hey Issei. Raynare said quietly after a few seconds. He turned towards her. How did she know we went to Kuo? She said, suspicious. Issei thought about it. No one told her. She shouldn't have known, but she did. Extremely odd. I don't know, actually. Maybe it's in her medical database, or something like that. Issei suggested. I guess so, that woman, I swear, sometimes I think she knows everything. Raynare thought. Some of the things Lisa said and did were very suspicious to her and she began to wonder if she was a little more than a doctor. Oh well. As long as she's an ally, it doesn't matter. On her way down the hall, Lisa passed a tall teenage boy with a delinquent's clothes and bright silver hair. She stopped next to him and he stood beside her. They faced different directions and each had a hard face. If you go in there and cause trouble, volley Lucifer, I'll eradicate you myself. Lisa said in a stern and cold voice, completely unlike her normal form of speech. The look of hesitation and surprise crossed his features. The boy, Vali, thought about her words for a second, then replied. He recognized her. If you tell me that, I can hardly go against it, can I? Even I stand no chance against you right now. He said and turned around. Vali Lucifer, the White Dragon Emperor, walked down the hall from where he came. Stopping at the end, he turned back and looked at her. But, soon enough I'm be coming for you, and after that I'll be coming for him. Vali said and disappeared into motes of light. Lisa sighed. Get strong soon, Issei. I won't be able to protect you forever. Back inside Issei and Raynare's penthouse, the two of them had found something to do. Issei was reading a book and Raynare was trying her hardest to distract him. He sat on the couch with his legs propped up and she sat next to him, poking him in the sides and flipping the pages in his book and tussling his hair and whatever else she could think of to get his attention. He read with a grin on his face. He thoroughly enjoyed her doting, and though he held the book and looked at it, all his attention was on her. He couldn't read so much as a sentence with his angel so close. Issei. 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 Raynare repeated his name over and over again, accentuating each repetition with an increasingly hard poke to his stomach. He started to laugh, but still focused on his book. She started blowing air at him, making him scrunch up his face. He did notice how good her breath smelled, though. The thought struck him, he wanted to kiss her, a lot. He resisted the urge. Issei slowly and deliberately closed and put down his book on the coffee table and turned to Raynare. He had a grin on his face. Raynare. 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 He poked her in the stomach too, turning the tables on the fallen angel. On the last Raynare, Issei lunged at her and started tickling her with all his might. Raynare collapsed into a laughing mess as her boyfriend tickled her relentlessly. She tried to fight him off, but all she could muster was a light punch, not even enough to push him. The two of them were laughing like mad, and when Issei looked up, they'd both fallen off where they'd been sitting and had ended up on the floor between the couch and coffee table. I win. Issei said, sitting over her. Raynare had a few lingering giggles and she breathed heavily beneath Issei. She was glad she'd gotten his attention, but he challenged her and it meant war. Is that so? She breathed out, still feeling out of breath. MMHM. Issei hummed, nodding. I beg to differ. Raynare said. She had an evil glint in her eyes and Issei was wary. She sat up and immediately jumped at Issei. She tickled him more than he had her, causing him to writhe and squirm under her fingers. He laughed so hard he couldn't breathe, but Raynare didn't stop. A minute or so later, a heavily breathing Issei lay on the ground beneath a triumphant Raynare. She straddled him underneath her, preventing Issei from launching a counterattack. He would have been blushing at the position they were in, if not for the fact that he was face down and completely out of breath. I'd say I win, Raynare said with a smirk, poking Issei's back. He laughed under her and thumped his head against the floor. Yes ma'am. He said, his voice muffled by the floor. Good. She said and stood up off of him. Issei picked himself up, still laughing a bit. I guess I should make something to eat. Issei suggested after he'd collected himself. He sat down on the couch. Nope. Let's go out. Raynare exclaimed, sitting next to him and putting her head on his shoulder. He put his arm around her. Sounds good to me. Where to? I don't know. You've lived here way longer than me, you pick. Issei put his head back, thinking. I've got it. Raynare looked at him expectantly after he didn't say anything else. Are you gonna tell me or what? She asked. Nope. It's a surprise. I'll go make a reservation. Issei said. He flew off the couch and into their room, locking the door. Raynare, still on the couch, sighed. She looked at the coffee table, at what book Issei had been reading. His copy of How to Be a Good Boyfriend lay on its side, one of the pages dog-eared to keep his place. Raynare smiled softly. He really was trying his best for her. Issei came out of the room a minute or two later. He wore a grin on his face. We're golden. He said. Raynare looked at him and matched his grin. You really won't tell your girlfriend where you're taking her? She asked. It's a surprise. Issei said, his smile widening. Raynare huffed good-naturedly. She still had a smile, but she was genuinely curious. She trusted him, though. He had good taste, if nothing else. Fee, and she said, sensing that he wouldn't relent. The two of them settled back into doing random things around their house. Issei picked his book back up and Raynare started fiddling with their TV, trying to set it up for movie streaming. About 15 minutes later, someone knocked at their door. Issei opened it up, expecting a repairman, but was surprised when it was Officer Yoshikage instead. Good afternoon. Can I come in? Yoshikage said, tipping his hat to Issei. Issei greeted him and led him inside, sitting with the man at their table bar while Raynare made tea. Sorry to show up on such short notice, but you've still got a bit of business to take care of as far as your inheritance and such. I know you said your step-parents disowned you, but they hadn't made it legal yet, so you're still their sole heir. The officer said, going slow to prevent confusion. Really? So, all their stuff is mine? Issei asked, not using any tact. The comment made Yoshikage cringe inwardly. How terrible could his step-parents have been to him to make him care so little about their deaths? Yoshikage didn't know the specifics, but they must have been awful. Raynare brought Officer Yoshikage a cup of tea and handed another to Issei. Thanks. Yes. They had roughly 600 million yen in savings, 2 houses, and other stuff, like furniture and objects. You'll have to talk to someone else to get the specifics, but you've just become a rich man. For now, anyway. Who knows how far that much money will go in today's economy? Yoshikage said light-heartedly. Issei exhaled slowly, taking all the information in. He was happy that he got a chance to spit in the face of his step-parents one last time. They'd made a mistake, and now he owned both their stuff and the stuff they'd taken from him. It made him glad, but also guilty for having such morbid thoughts. That's great news. Who do I need to talk to? Issei asked the officer. There's a man ready to come up to the police station to explain it all to you, whenever you feel like it. Sooner rather than later, preferably. Officer Yoshikage explained. Well, we're actually expecting a repairman here pretty soon, and then we've got reservations at Issei whispered the last part into Yoshikage's ear, preventing Raynare from hearing it, much to her ire. The officer's face lit up with surprise and then morphed into a smirk. Ooh. Fancy. Well then, how about tomorrow? Officer Yoshikage asked, back in business mode. Issei glanced at Raynare. She nodded. Yeah, that should work. Tomorrow's Friday, so we'll be good to go after school's out. Great. Well, I'll tell the guy you'll be there tomorrow. He's patient, so it shouldn't be an issue. Someone knocked on the door. Issei opened it, and a tall man in a grey shirt and blue jeans with a tool belt stood in the doorway. Issei shook the man's hand, and he introduced himself. "Been told Yagata window needs fixin'. I'm your man. Name Sadao Yukaza. Good to meet ya." The man moved past Issei, who stood in the doorway with a dumbfounded expression. Yukaza, the man's last name was the same as Mitsuda's. Mitsuda Yukaza. This was Mitsuda's father. Why yeah, you two, Issei breathed out, finally. Raynare and Yoshikage looked at him with a puzzled expression as he moved back into the penthouse. Sadao tipped his grey hat to the both of them as he moved over to the window. His gaze lingered on the officer, but he didn't say anything. Sadao whistled apprehensively as he approached the broken window slowly. You really did a number on this one, huh? Well, there's a couple of options. 1, I see apostrophe and just tape it up, literally the repairman tapped a thick roll of clear tape at his belt. Or, I can take out a section of glass and replace it. It'll be minute, but it'll look better than the tape. What'd you think? Tape, please. Issei said extremely fast. Raynare gave him an odd look. She was sensing his nervousness, and she was wondering why he was acting so strange. Who had they just let in their home? She was glad Officer Yoshikage had stuck around. Officer Yoshikage was wary of the repairman. If he'd heard correctly, the guy was Sadao Yukaza, someone Yoshikage had dealt with on multiple occasions. He didn't look similar, but every time Yoshikage had seen him, he'd been in a convict's uniform, not a repairman's. He had a long history of beating his wife and son. At some point, he beat his wife to a point where his teenage son had stepped in and tried to fight him, leading to the boy being sent to hospital with severe injuries and Sadao being arrested. Because of a legal loophole, he'd been able to avoid going to prison, but had still been removed from their house and put on probation. Yoshikage knew the guy was trouble. Sure. You're the boss. Be done in 2 shakes of a dog's tail. Issei sighed in relief. He wanted the man out as soon as possible. Sadao removed the tape from his belt and put a long strip on both sides of the window, slowly, so there wouldn't be air bubbles visible. Within a few minutes, he was finished. He stood up, looked at the window from a few different angles, and clapped his hands. Done and done. Is that all, or was there something else? Sadao asked, looking at Issei. Issei shook his head. Nope, that's all. Thanks for coming. Issei gestured towards the door. To someone else, it might have seemed rude, but due to Sadao's upbringing, he didn't even notice. He moved to leave, but before he did, he gave Issei a comment. You know, you remind me of boy, Mitsuda. You both got same fire in your eyes. Well, good afternoon. Sadao stepped out, leaving the penthouse. Issei let out the breath he'd been holding, and Raynare finally understood why he'd been so tense. If that was Mitsuda's dad, it was no small wonder he'd be a little nervous. Phew. Glad he didn't start any trouble. Officer Yoshikage said. I would have left a minute ago, but I had a bad feeling about that guy, so I stayed put. What makes you say that? Who was he? Raynare asked. That was Sadao Yukaza, like he said. He got sent to the pen for beating his wife and son nearly to death, but got out on a loophole. It's a real shame that someone like him is walking around free when we've got innocent people doing time. Ah, sorry. Got distracted. Anyway, he got removed from his family and put on probation, so I was worried he might be a little volatile. I'm glad he didn't recognize me, otherwise he might not have been so nice. Yoshikage said, rubbing the brim of his police hat. Issei was reeling. Mitsuda was beat by his father. Issei suddenly understood the boy a lot better. That poor kid, Raynare said, probing for information. She saw Issei's reaction and knew of his history with the boy, and she wanted to fill in some blanks. Yeah, Sadao was beating up on the wife one time, and the kid, Mitsuda if I remember right, stood up for her and tried to fight the father. He got hurt so bad he was sent to the hospital and we had to get involved. As if that wasn't enough, the mother died of cancer a few months later. That kid definitely drew a short stick, that's for sure. Officer Yoshikage spoke solemnly, showing his concern for the boy. Issei's head was spinning. Mitsuda had gotten hurt trying to protect his mother. And then she died. And his dad not only wasn't around, but he was an abusive asshole. Issei felt like he wanted to hug the boy, despite his bullying. They were two peas in a pod, both dealt a bad hand by a world that didn't care. That's awful, Issei said quietly, talking to himself more than anyone else. It is that, definitely. Well, I'd better be going. Call me tomorrow when you're ready and I'll give you two a ride over to the station to get everything settled. Goodbye. Officer Yoshikage said cheerfully. He tipped his hat to the two of them and left, Issei and Raynare waving him out. Issei sighed. He wasn't used to socializing with so many people in one day. Between his first day at school, the meeting with the student council president and everyone after, he was mentally exhausted. He crossed the room and flopped down on the couch. He looked at Sadao's handiwork. The glass in the window was fixed, though it looked kind of raggedy. Raynare sat next to Issei and fell over on his lap, laying across him. Something on your mind? She said, looking up at him. Who'd have known he'd have such a horrible life? Issei said, talking to himself as much as Raynare. Mitsuda. So what, you've had a hard life too. She said, not intending to forgive the boy for a thing. The time she watched him beat Issei mercilessly had been more than enough to make her hate him. Yeah, I know. But still. I know how he feels. It's tough, not having anyone in the world to lean on. Issei said. He was absent-mindedly stroking Raynare's soft raven black hair, and it felt good for both of them. That's no excuse for treating you so terribly. You've had a rough time, but you didn't start bullying people for no good reason, so why should he? Raynare asked. She was honestly shocked Issei was even trying to defend Mitsuda. He was different though. My step-parents might have been awful people that deserved what they got, but they never once hit me. Mitsuda didn't have that luxury. His birth father, the very person who brought him into the world, beat him and his mother. I can't imagine what kind of effect that'd have on someone. Issei said. Despite being treated so badly by Mitsuda, Issei couldn't help but sympathize with him. I guess you're right. I still don't forgive him, though. I mean, come on, he tried to kill you, like, 2 days ago. Did you forget? Raynare said. She understood where Issei was coming from, but she still didn't quite agree. No, it's definitely still fresh. Don't get me wrong, I still hate the guy, I just get him a little more, I guess. I'd like nothing more than to bash his face in. Issei said, looking down to Raynare and smiling brightly. The words didn't match the smile, so to any normal person it would look kind of ridiculous, but as for the fallen, she agreed wholeheartedly. That's more like it. Well, next time he tries to kill you, don't hold back, okay? And hit him once for me. She said. I doubt he'll try again. Not to toot my own horn, but I beat him pretty well, I think. I wouldn't know, actually, since that was my first fight. Issei, you threw him into a tree. I think you won. But no, his kind of person definitely isn't done. He'll try something again soon, I know it. But that's a problem for another day. Let's talk about something else. Raynare said, poking his with both of her pointer fingers. Anything in particular? Oh, I know. Issei. She said, in a tone that, to Issei, sounded like angels singing. Which, he guessed, it pretty much was. You could tell me where we're going later, she said, and reached up to fiddle with his hair from below him. I can't. It's a surprise. Telling would ruin it. He said, a smile on his face. She grinned. He was resolved. Issei was 100% sure she'd enjoy it, sure enough to not even tell her what it was. She was happy he'd try so hard for her, even if it irked her not to know where they'd be going. Give me a hint, Raynare said, in a pitiful but good-natured whine. A hint? Okay. Here's the hint. It's a secret. Issei. Issei walked out of the bathroom, dressed in a black long-sleeve button-up and black pants. His hair was neater than normal, and he wore black dress shoes. As he stepped into his and Raynare's bedroom, his jaw dropped to the floor. Like what you see. Raynare said, twirling around. Issei stared, unable to form words. Her beauty was stunning, and she left him breathless. She wore a long black dress, with black heels and a strap around her neck. The dress perfectly complemented her raven hair and violet eyes, and the combination blew Issei away. Issei coughed and looked away. Why yeah. Raynare huffed. Issei, you don't like it? She said, teasing him. She could tell from a mile away he loved her outfit, but she wanted to mess with him. What? And no. I mean yes. I am mean, Issei stopped, putting his hands over his violently blushing face. He inhaled and compassed himself. Raynare, you're the most gorgeous woman I've ever seen. He said, looking her in the eyes. Raynare's plan to tease him backfired as it was her turn to blush profusely. She turned away from him and hid her face behind a small black purse that hadn't been in her hands a second ago. Wait, I can make it even better. Close your eyes. Issei asked. She looked back at him and then did as instructed. She awaited him eagerly, not knowing what he'd do, but not really caring either. He could rip her out of the dress then and there and she'd be fine with it. Issei dug in his pocket for a second and brought out what he wanted to give Raynare. Raynare felt Issei's hands touch her neck briefly before she felt cold metal on her dot. Okay, you can look now. Issei said, stepping back. Raynare opened her eyes and looked down. Around her neck, hanging from a bright silver chain, was a heart-shaped diamond with two silver angel wings forming a larger heart around the gem. She gasped. Issei, you didn't, she breathed out, touching the precious necklace. A tear fell from her right eye and she held the pendant tight in her hands. Raynare? Why are you crying? Do you not like it? Issei's worried questions were silenced when Raynare threw herself around him, kissing him with all she had. He was surprised for a moment but soon returned the kiss. A few seconds later, Raynare pulled back. If they kept going, she'd do something that might interfere with their date. Where did you even get this? We've been together for the past several days, how did you find the time? Raynare asked Issei. She loved her new necklace, but she had no idea how he'd managed to acquire it. Well, we were at the mall, I saw an advertisement for a guardian angel necklace and it was perfect for you. So, while you were staring really intensely at a dress, I slipped off and bought it. I'd been waiting for the perfect time to give it to you and this seemed right. Issei explained. Do you like it? He asked. Raynare cupped the necklace in her hands. She did like it, a lot. What she liked more, though, was that Issei had not only bought her the perfect necklace, but delivered it in what had to be the most romantic way possible. Could she even ask for a better boyfriend? Issei, I love it. I'll treasure it forever. She said, and Issei tightly hugged her. I'm glad. We should get going though, our reservations are for 8. Issei said, pulling back and gesturing towards a clock that read 7:30. Okay, but how are we getting there? Raynare asked, curious. If he asked, she'd teleport them, but after what he'd done already, she was positive he had something planned. Issei glanced at the clock. I've got it covered. He should be here now. Well, are you ready? Issei asked, holding out his hand for Raynare to take. She took it and he led the out of their room and down the building, into the lobby. As Raynare and Issei crossed the floor to the building's exit, she glanced at Issei's face. His smile could have lit up a room and she couldn't help but feel happy too. 2 weeks ago, she was a fallen angel assassin tasked with killing Issei before he became a threat. Now, she was just a normal girl who couldn't possibly stand to be without her first love. Issei was her first too. She'd dated before, sure, that's a given, considering she was created hundreds of years ago, but she'd never found a guy she liked and she'd certainly never fallen in love. She once dated a man for 4 months, but in all that time, he never managed to steal her heart. Then, along comes Issei, who does it in less than a week. She'd never in her life felt the way she feels with him. He makes everything she does meaningful and gives her life a bright shining light at the center. If he ever left or got taken from her, well there'd be hell to pay, for someone. No, she'd never be proper without him again. Issei was the same. If for any reason Raynare left, his life would be done. The way he felt about it, his life was already over before she stepped in. He owed everything to her and he'd spend the rest of his life giving her his all. She was the last thing he had, and even now with all his wealth and possessions, he'd never had anything that compared to his angel. But they weren't focused on that right now. At the moment, Issei was focused on showing Raynare the best night ever. As Issei led Raynare outside, he tried not to grin too hard. After Yoshikage left earlier, Issei had gotten a text from the officer about Yoshikage's other job. Officer Yoshikage of the Kuo Police Department has moonlight job. As a limo driver. Raynare stepped outside behind Issei and she gasped. Issei, a limo, she practically squealed. Officer Yoshikage, dressed in a tux but still wearing his police hat, waved at them from the front seat of a long black limo. Issei smiled back at her, and she hugged him for what had to be the 10th time in an hour, not that he'd ever get tired of it. After they pulled apart, Issei opened a door at the rear of the limo and gestured for Raynare to get inside. She composed herself and entered the limousine. The interior was extremely luxurious, with black leather seats all around and bright blue lights keeping it all lit. Raynare sat down at one side and Issei got in after her, closing the door. Yoshikage looked in his mirror to make sure they were settled and took off. He already knew where they were headed, as Issei had told him earlier. Raynare laid her head on Issei's shoulders. "Issei, can you tell me now?" she asked, hoping he'd finally spill the beans. "Nope. It's a secret." Raynare huffed. She appreciated that he didn't want to spoil the surprise for her, but she also wished that he'd tell her. "We'll be there soon, so don't worry about it," Issei said, smiling at her. "Ugh. Fine. Leave me alone, damn it," Mitsuda yelled as he walked through the alleys next to his ramshackle house. The recipient of his yelling, a small black dog, whimpered sadly. Mitsuda sighed and rubbed his temples. He liked dogs, he just didn't like that this one kept following him, no matter what. Ever since he'd woken up at the base of a tree yesterday, he'd been followed by the dog. It had eerie red eyes and responded to everything Mitsuda said, like it was intelligent. The one thing it wouldn't respond to, though, was to stop following him. Mitsuda had let it at first, up until he'd woken up this morning to the dog sleeping at the foot of his bed. He hadn't even let the dog inside, and he was freaked out by the fact that it had just appeared in his house, so he tried to shoo the dog away. It wouldn't listen. It followed him all throughout his day, even at school. Though, no one else seemed to react to it and Mitsuda had started to wonder if he was going crazy. So, he decided to spend some time in Kuo town and get some fresh air. It was just becoming dark outside, his favorite time of day. As he moved through alleyway after alleyway, his preferred method of travel, the dog kept following him. Mitsuda wanted it to leave him alone, but he also didn't. He had no one left, his father, an abusive convict and his mother, dead. The dog, annoying as it was his only companion at the moment. Mitsuda stepped out of the alley and onto a busy city street. People were everywhere, but no one seemed to react to Mitsuda's animal friend. He looked down at the dog, who'd fallen a few steps behind. "Just what the hell are you, huh?" Mitsuda said, looking at the dog. "Your greatest wish can come true." A cheery voice caught Mitsuda's attention, and a flyer was thrust into his face by a girl in a red dress with wild black hair. He took the flyer, more on instinct than anything, and shoved it into his pocket. He shoved past the rude girl, muttering to her about watching where she was going, and walked off down the street, dog in tow. The limo pulled to a stop in the ritziest part of town, right in front of what was essentially a skyscraper. Raynare looked at the building, trying to figure out why they stopped. There were no visible signs or markings, other than several neon lights with no particular pattern. Issei looked up at the building alongside Raynare. She turned to him. "Is this the place?" she asked, not quite sure. "Yep. We've got to go all the way to the roof, that's our stop," Issei said. Yoshikage got out of the car and opened the door nearest Issei for him to get out. Issei exited the car, then turned and extended his hand for Raynare, like a gentleman. She took it gratefully and got out of the limousine. They held hands as they walked through the building's double automatic doors. Issei waved at Yoshikage, who waved back and re-entered the limo. As they entered the building, Raynare was slightly confused. Right on entry, it looked like garbage. She looked forward with some apprehension, though she followed Issei without hesitation. He had a knowing smirk on his face as he led her through the decrepit building by hand, stepping over garbage and wrecked furniture on their path. They passed a desk with no one in it and a stairwell with an out-of-order sign over the broken door. How a stairwell was out of order, Raynare had no idea, but she was getting a bad vibe from the whole place. "Don't worry," Issei said briefly, offering her a reassuring smile. She gripped his hand a little tighter and returned his statement with a nervous smile of her own. They approached what looked like a broken-down elevator, but Issei pressed the button next to it without an ounce of confusion or hesitation. He's been here before, Raynare thought. Something was up, she guessed. The elevator dinged once, and the door opened to reveal a lavish elevator with gilded white paneled walls and a white tile floor. Issei stepped on immediately, but Raynare walked on slowly, trying to figure out what was going on. After she entered the elevator and stood beside him, Issei pressed the only button the elevator had, a shining button that looked like a black gemstone, and they started to ascend quickly. At this point, Raynare was understandably very confused. She'd shown up expecting a nice restaurant or something of that effect, and then they find a derelict skyscraper. Then, as if that wasn't confusing enough, they opened probably the nicest elevator in the world. She had no clue what was happening. "Confused yet?" Issei asked, sensing how tense she was. Yeah. What in the world is this place?" she said, gesturing with her free hand. "It's secret. Don't worry, I was confused my first time too." Issei, that sounds so sketchy. I guess it does, doesn't it? Just a bit. The elevator came to a halt. Are you ready? Issei asked, rubbing a circle on Raynare's hand. He looked giddy. I think so, she said. His excitement was rubbing off on her, and despite not being aware of the situation, she was looking forward to what was on the other side of the elevator door. That's good. He said. The door opened. Raynare gasped, and Issei let out an excited laugh. Welcome to Shangri-La. He said cheesily. On the other side of the door was probably one of the nicest places Raynare had ever been. On the roof of the building, there was a restaurant that catered to the rye of the rich. All around, there were padded leather seats, silk tablecloths, and waiters in fine clothes. People in suits and dresses conversed happily, and the sound of water flowing could be heard, coming from a large waterfall in the center of the roof. A string quartet played in one corner, and the music was soothing and upbeat. There were soft white lights, but the real light in the place came from the moon and stars, which were out in force. Raynare realized what the nonsensical neon lights she'd seen earlier were for. From the angle on top of the roof, she could see the light reflected off a pond on the ground. The lights, in the water's reflection, spelled Shangri-La. Shangri-La. This is crazy, she breathed out. Raynare, hello, Raynare. Issei snapped his fingers, and Raynare realized she'd been staring. Haha, sorry. They stepped off of the elevator together and were immediately approached by a waiter. Issei, Haidu, table for two. Issei said, talking to the waiter. The waiter nodded and gestured for them to follow him. Right this way, sir and madam. Raynare followed close behind Issei as he himself followed the waiter. As they walked to a table, nearing the edge of the roof, several people waved to Issei. He waved back to all of them, and Raynare wondered how he knew them. She knew he was extremely shy, so these had to be people he'd known for a while for him to be so comfortable around them. They stopped at a table right on the edge of the roof, looking out over the city. The waiter gestured to their table, set with candle and wine glasses and other fancy assortments. Issei pulled Raynare's chair out and she sat down, thanking him. Issei sat down in his own seat and pulled it in. The waiter left. Isn't he going to ask us what we want to drink? Raynare asked, confused for the millionth time in the hour. Nope. They'll bring us water and some of the finest wine you've ever seen. You can request something else, but they probably only have stuff you've never heard of, like fancy imported sodas and things like that. Raynare nodded at Issei's explanation. Wine is fine with me. It's probably my favorite drink. Raynare said, looking at the tall wine glasses on the table. There was 4 total, 2 for each of them, one for red wine and the other for white wine. They also each had a smaller glass for water. I've never had it since I'm underage. They don't really care here, but I've just never felt like drinking. Issei said. Raynare faked a gasp. Well, you've got to tonight. I can't believe you've never tried wine before. It's heavenly, no pun intended. Really? I'm not sure, I've never drank before. I don't want to get drunk and embarrass you or anything, Issei said, nervous. Issei, you could never do anything to embarrass me. Well, that's not entirely true, but you couldn't do anything here to embarrass me, especially if it means getting drunk. Come on, you've got to try some wine. You can't bring me to a place like this and expect me to drink alone, Issei. It's not polite. Raynare said, smirking. She played the it's not polite card, knowing Issei would care about something like that. I guess you're right, okay. I'll try some after we eat, I promise. Issei was extremely nervous at the prospect of drinking. He'd never had any alcohol before and he wasn't sure how he'd handle it. Issei always heard horrible stories of what happens to people when they get drunk and he wasn't sure it was something he wanted to try, but if it meant making Raynare happy, he'd do it. Great. Now, what's good, Raynare said, picking up the menu on the table. Her eyes bugged out of her head as she saw the ridiculous prices of the things on the menu. Some people couldn't afford the things on it with a whole month's pay. Issei, are you sure this is alright? I'm all for fancy food, but it's so expensive. Issei looked up at her from his own menu. Oh, don't worry about that. I've got it covered. Order whatever you want, don't feel bad. He told her and looked back down at his menu. Okay, she said, still unsure. The food at Shangri-La was a lot of money. The waiter came back about 2 minutes later. Raynare had begrudgingly decided on a meal, despite how expensive they were, and Issei wanted to try something he hadn't gotten before. I'll have the escargot, thanks. Issei said and handed the man his menu. The waiter looked to Raynare. Raynare hesitated. Her meal was not cheap, but when Issei looked at her expectantly, she ordered. The dragon steak, please. She said. The waiter nodded, took her menu, and left. Another waiter approached them, this time in slightly different darker clothes. He brought with him a cart filled with wine bottles and a singular pitcher of water. The man had a large mustache and dark hair. He had a large smile on his face. He stopped at their table with the cart and cleared his dot. He nodded to Issei, who nodded back and then picked up an ornate bottle of wine and looked at Raynare. He spoke with a thick French accent. Madam, this is a special day and for that we brought you a special wine. From what Monsieur Haidu has told us, it's your first date. Oui, a special day indeed. So, a red wine that tastes like love itself, no. For that, I give you this. The Domaine Leroy Musigny Grand Cru 2012. A bottle younger than the both of you, yet just as beautiful. The man poured 2 glasses of the wine for them and set the bottle back on the cart. He reached for a second bottle and held it up for them to see. Ah, and this wine is no slouch either, Monsieur Haidu, no doubt you want a wine as delicious as your lady friend, ooh. Well, unfortunately no wine exists, but this is the closest we can come. I give you. The Lucien Lemoyne Chevalier Montrachet, 2010. From my homeland of France, you will not find a better white wine. And? I do not know how wine or wine prices work. I'm assuming these are both adequate wines. Do not quote me on this. The man poured them both glasses of the white wine and then put the bottle back. Then, he poured them both a glass of water. Well, monsieur and madam, that is all I have for you right now. Should you have need of me, simply yell Pierre. And I shall come running as fast as my legs will carry me. Till then, mes amis, I bid you. The man, Pierre, bowed extravagantly to both of them. Adieu. Pierre tipped his invisible hat and left with the cart of wine. He was interesting. Raynare said, looking at her now full wine glasses. Oh yeah, that's Pierre for you. The man lives and breathes wine. He'll put on a show, no matter what, just to try and get someone to love wine as much as he does. He's a great guy. Issei said, nodding. How do you know these people? It seems like you're close with everyone in the place. Raynare asked Issei, curious. My family, my first family that is, brought me here a lot. My mother and father were both filthy rich treasure hunters, so we came here several times a year. Most of the people here all know each other and those that don't are quickly introduced. Shangri-La has its own community, pretty much. I've known most of these people since childhood. If you've noticed, they're all looking at us. Raynare looked around at Issei's words and surely enough, most of the other patrons in the restaurant were watching the two of them unashamedly. 2 of them even yelled and gave Issei a thumbs up. They've never seen me bring a girl in here, so they're a little excited. Once they figure out you've gotten me to drink, they're gonna riot. Why's that? They've all been trying to get me to drink for years, especially Pierre. I'm sure he was shocked. They want to see you drunk that badly. My dad was a party all by himself when he got drunk, I guess they're hoping I'll be the same. I guess that makes sense. It's endearing, in a weird way. As Raynare and Issei conversed, one of the men in the restaurant came up to their table. He was a large man, Nigerian in nationality, and wore a gold and green formal robe. He shook Issei's hand and then started talking. He spoke with a thick accent in the deepest voice Raynare had ever heard. Issei, it's been too long. How have you been, my young friend? I've been well, Abdallah. How about yourself? If I was any better I could not stand it. If it pleases you and the lady, may I sit with you for a moment? I wish to converse with you. Issei looked at Raynare, asking her a nonverbal question. She nodded quickly, not wanting to seem rude. It was kind of weird that he'd sit with them on a date, but she didn't want to be mean to one of Issei's friends. Issei gave him a thumbs up. I thank you. Abdallah pulled a chair from an empty table and sat beside them. So, what's new? How are your kids? Issei asked the man. Ah, they are fantastic. I could not ask for better children. Ah, but that's not what I wish to talk about. I do not want to intrude on your date, so let us keep things brief. Abdallah said, serious. Alright. What is it? Issei said. Abdallah put his hand on Issei's shoulder, like he was comforting an old friend. I wish to offer you my condolences on the death of your parents. They were my treasured friends and I have been very sad with them gone. I think I speak for everyone present when I say I am glad you are here. I would also like to say, I am very glad your step-parents are gone. Abdallah spat the words, like he couldn't stand the taste of them in his mouth. Thank you Abdallah. I'm glad to be back. Issei said, nodding his head to the man in thanks. Well, I will leave you to your date. I hope you will introduce her to us all soon. Count on it. Bye Abdallah. Goodbye for now, Issei. Abdallah stood up, pat Issei on the back and left the two of them. He was nice. Raynare said. Yeah, he's awesome. He was one of my dad's best friends. Issei said, solemn. So, if you had all these people, why did you have to live with those awful step-parents? Couldn't someone here have taken you in? Raynare asked. He seemed such good friends with the people here, couldn't someone have done something for him? I wish. No, my step-parents secured rights to me before anyone here could have. If I'd had any blood relations to anyone here, it might happened, but almost everyone who frequents this place isn't native to Kuo or even Japan. Abdal is even from Nigeria. Issei explained. Still, it seems like someone here could have done something for you. Raynare said. Well, when I was about 11, Abdallah tried to get custody of me and there was a whole legal battle. My step-parents were no pushovers, though, and they won. I guess after they disowned me, I could have taken up with someone here, but it hardly matters now. Issei said. Raynare shook her head. There really hadn't been any way for Issei to get out of his step-parents' clutches. A shame, really. Let's not worry about that, though. This is our first real date, so let's talk about something else. Issei said. Okay, tell me about yourself. Raynare said. She didn't know a whole lot about Issei and wanted to learn more. There's not much to tell. I like reading and learning and playing good. I like reading and learning. That's about it. Issei said, almost slipping up. Raynare caught it. What was that third thing, Issei? Did you just say you like playing guitar? She said, a sly grin on her face. He sighed. Yes, I play a little guitar. Why didn't you want to tell me? I'd love to see you play the guitar. Raynare said excitedly. Because I'm not that good and I was worried you would ask to see me play, Issei said, looking down and rubbing his head. Don't let him lie to you, he's great. Yeah, that kid can play. He's awesome with the guitar. Several voices yelled from across the restaurant. Issei looked up, embarrassed. You were all listening, you guys need to mind your business. Issei yelled, his face beet red. Raynare laughed. Someone get a guitar. Another voice yelled and several people including the staff started scrambling for a guitar. Issei sighed and put his hand in his hands. Oh man, now I've done it, Issei said, sadly. He did not want to embarrass himself in front of Raynare by messing up a song. She laughed. Issei, I'm sure you'll do great. I'm excited to see your random performance. Raynare said. Issei sighed again. Pierre rushed up to Issei with a 6-string acoustic guitar. Issei begrudgingly took the instrument and fiddled with the tuning. He looked up to see the entire restaurant looking at him with gleeful expressions. Do I really have to do this? Issei asked the crowd. Yes. They all yelled in response. He laughed nervously. I don't even know what to play, he said, trailing off. Do the one about an angel. Abdallah's voice rang out, far deeper than the rest of the voices. Issei blanched. Oh no. I wouldn't have taken this guitar if I knew I'd have to play that, Issei thought. Something else. Issei said sheepishly. Raynare tilted her head, looking at him curiously. The one about an angel, Issei? She asked. Play it, Issei. Play the angel song. Come on, don't be a scaredy cat in front of your girl. Angel, angel. Even more people started yelling for Issei. He sighed for the final time, then took up the guitar. It was so quiet, you could have heard a pin drop. He licked his lips nervously and played a few notes, testing the guitar and its tuning. Satisfied, he exhaled and started to play. I'm in love with an angel, heaven forbid. Raynare gasped. She thought he'd just play something on the guitar, she hadn't expected him to sing too. And so well, at that. Not to mention, the song he was singing. He's in love with an angel. If only they knew, Raynare thought. The patrons had no idea Issei was telling the truth as he sang. Made me a believer, with a touch of her skin. Raynare smiled. It was like he was singing the song for her, to her. I'd go to hell and back with you, stay lost in what we found. As Issei performed, Raynare found herself falling in love all over again. A couple verses later, she was ready to get married on the spot. I'm in love with an angel who's afraid of the light, her halo is broken, but there's fight in her eyes. Issei, this angel is in love with you too, don't you ever forget it. Raynare thought to herself. The song drew to a close and Issei finished it off spectacularly. People started clapping and the two guys that had given him a thumbs up earlier were hooting and hollering. Issei handed the guitar back to Pierre, who took it back where he'd gotten it and waved to the crowd. Slowly, people stopped clapping and went back to their meals and drinks, everyone a little bit happier thanks to Issei. Issei sighed and put his head in his hands. I was so nervous, Issei said, looking back up at Raynare, who had a rather large smirk on her face. Issei, I love you too. She said. Well, what? But, I didn't even say it, Issei said, confused. Yes you did, you just sang a beautiful song about it. Raynare pointed out, a smile on her face. Issei blushed. Oh, I guess I did, huh? He said, rubbing the back of his neck. The waiter with 2 trays came up to their table, finally bringing their food. In front of Issei, he sat a plate of escargot, a French dish made mostly of Friendland snails. Yes, snails. In front of Raynare, he put the biggest steak she'd ever seen. Her eyes widened and her mouth watered at the sight of it. They thanked the waiter, and he left. Issei and Raynare started to eat, and the rest of the patrons left them alone. Will you go out with me? Mitsuda's brow scrunched up in confusion. Some random blue-haired girl in a different school's uniform had approached him out of nowhere and asked his name, then asked him out. Now, Mitsuda wasn't intelligent, but he was smart enough to smell something fishy. Why should I? Mitsuda asked, wary. Something about the girl gave him a bad vibe, and the dog between his legs obviously didn't like her either. It was growling ferociously at her, though she didn't seem to notice. Well, I saw you, and you looked really cute, so I thought. No, I'll pass. Go bother someone else. Mitsuda said, shoving past the girl and continuing his walk. It was completely dark outside, and something about the night air felt wrong. Mitsuda wanted to hurry home. Damn. Raynare was right, this is harder than it looks. Well, sorry kid. Mitsuda turned around to see the girl transform. Right before his eyes, she turned more mature and taller, and her school uniform shifted into a very revealing red dress. Mitsuda turned back around and started to run. He knew something was off. You might have lived longer if you'd said yes. As he ran, he felt something hit him hard in the back. He staggered and looked down to see a bright glowing red spear jutting out of the center of his, just above his heart and between his shoulder blades. He coughed blood and fell to his knees. The girl, who was obviously not just some girl at this point, sprouted two black feathered wings and took off into the air, not caring at all that she just murdered someone. You bitch. All I wanted was a normal life, Mitsuda said, falling forward on the ground. His face hit the concrete pavement and his last thought was how sorry he was to leave the dog alone like he was. It reminded him of his father. But, instead of getting angry, Mitsuda just felt numb. So numb, in fact, that he never noticed the flyer in his pocket glowing red. Issei sat back in his chair and sighed. Raynare mimicked him, the both of them incredibly full from their meal. That was fantastic, Raynare said slowly. She had the appetite of a supernatural creature, and despite both the size of the meal and her smallish stature, she managed to eat the entire steak. I agree, but I can't help but feel insulted that you like the taste of dragon so much. Should I be worried? Issei joked, making Raynare laugh. She put her finger to her chin, as if she was considering. I'm not sure. I might like to eat you sometime. She said, putting a seductive edge into her voice. Issei coughed, not expecting her response, and began to blush furiously. Now, if I remember right, I believe my boyfriend promised me he'd drink with me after our meal, is that right, Issei? Raynare asked, twirling her glass of red wine in her hand. Issei smiled nervously and picked up his glass of red wine. I did promise, Issei said. Hey, everyone. Issei's drinking. Someone yelled and instantly all eyes were back on Issei. Issei sighed and when Raynare took a sip, he knocked back the entire glass at once. Raynare's eyes went wide. I say, when I said you should drink with me, I didn't mean all at once, you're supposed to savor wine, Raynare said, shocked that he'd down an entire glass of wine in one go when he'd never even drank before. Really? Mom always said you should drink alcohol as fast as possible. Issei said, exhaling and putting his now empty glass down. As soon as the glass touched the table, a yell went through the whole place. As soon as he entered, almost everyone in the restaurant had made bets on whether or not Issei would drink tonight, and now that he had, money was changing hands. Well, in other cases, yes, but not wine. Raynare was cut off by an angry Frenchman. Monsieur Haidu. If I see you drinking wine like that ever again, I will unleash upon you the fury of 1,000 Frenchmen. Pierre said, yelling from across the floor and shaking his fist. As Pierre yelled, Issei started to blink rapidly and rub his eyes. He began to sway a little in his chair. No way is Issei drunk. Raynare thought. The wine was some strong stuff, sure, but to be drunk off one glass. Right, my bad, Raynare, did you put something in my drink? I feel funny. Issei said, looking at his hands. Dragons are extremely susceptible to alcohol, Issei. You should have shown a little restraint. The stern voice of Drake spoke into his mind. Haha, oops. Issei thought, laughing a little. No, but I think you'd better hand me that other glass, Raynare said, reaching for Issei's white wine, only to be stopped by her slightly drunk boyfriend. No. I gotta drink it all, like I promised. Raynare smirked at Issei's words. Alright, let's see it then, big shot. Down the other glass too. Raynare challenged him. Issei grinned widely, excited by the prospect of a challenge. His normal timid persona was long gone and he picked up the second glass without hesitation. Fine then. Watch this. Issei drank the entire glass once again, albeit far slower this time. After he finished, he took the glass away from his mouth with an ah sound and put it back on the table. Raynare gave a slow clap. Wow, I didn't think you'd really do it. How do you feel? Raynare asked. Issei frowned and narrowed his eyes. Fuzzy. He said after a few moments. Raynare laughed out loud and it sounded like heaven, even to the drunk Issei. He grinned widely and followed her laugh with one of his own, though his had far more hiccups in it. Okay, Issei. Let's get you home before you cause permanent damage. No, no. I'm feeling another song. Issei said, throwing his arms out. The patrons of the restaurant all yelled in unison. They were beyond excited to see how drunk Issei would unfold. The air brought Issei the guitar back. Issei loudly twanged it. The restaurant, well, at this point, it was more of a fancy bar. The bar patrons all clapped and yelled for Issei to play something good. He was more than happy to oblige. Raynare laughed. It had been a while since she'd partied and she was okay with her date turning into a drunken party. Even if it would take several bottles of wine for her to get slightly buzzed, she was more than happy just to have fun with Issei. And Issei was about to have some fun, too. He started to play the guitar and his skills weren't nullified by the alcohol at all. Now, when he started to sing, that was another story. 99 bottles of beer on the wall. Issei cracked his eyes and immediately regret the decision. Even the slightest light burned and his head started to dot. He groaned and felt stirring beside him. His head swam. Raynare, is that you? He asked, refusing to try opening his eyes again. She giggled. Yes, it's me. I guess you're a little hungover, huh? You went a tad bit crazy yesterday. She said, a happy tone in her voice. Ugh, I'm sorry for ruining our date, Issei said, clutching his head. Ruin? Issei, that was the most fun I've had in years. You sure know how to show a girl a good time. She said, rubbing his back. She had thoroughly enjoyed drunk Issei's antics and she had especially enjoyed something he'd said when she tried to kiss him after they got home. No, no. I can't kiss you, I've got a girlfriend. Issei had said. She'd become understandably irate and asked him who she was. Her name is Raynare and she's the prettiest girl I've ever seen. She'd get real sad if I kissed someone else, so I'm not gonna. She'd felt her heart at his words and wanted to throw herself at him. Even now, when he sat in bed nursing what was without a doubt the worst headache of his life, he made her heart flutter. That's good, then. Honestly, I can't remember anything past the first glass of wine. Issei said. His eyes were tightly closed and he was sure if he tried to open them, he'd die. Well, all you need to know was that it was amazing. I'm very glad you decided to show me that place. Issei sighed. It's only natural I would, those guys are basically the only family I've got left, other than you of course. Issei said. He tried cracking his eyes again, only to recoil in pain. Raynare laughed at his discomfort. Dear darling, let me help you with that. Raynare said. She put her hand on the back of his head and a spell activated. Suddenly, Issei's hangover was gone and he felt top-notch, if a little tired. He opened his eyes and rubbed his face. Wow, thanks. I feel a million times better. Why are you? Issei said, immediately shutting his eyes again. He'd looked to his angel to thank her and realized she was entirely. She decided to mess with him. Why am I? Issei, do you not remember taking my first time? She asked quietly, faking a blush. Issei got a stern look on his face. I didn't really do anything to you while I was drunk, did I? I wouldn't. Issei said, sounding like he abhorred the thought of it. Raynare was a little confused. Well, no, you didn't, but would it really be that bad? You sound like the idea makes you sick. It does. If I'm going to sleep with you, I want to do it right, you know. Not drunk. Issei said, blushing a little and looking away. Raynare smiled and launched herself at him, hugging him and cooing about how he was the cutest thing she'd ever seen. He tried to shake her off, citing the need for them to get ready for school. She didn't listen. They weren't out of bed for another solid 20 minutes, despite Issei's protests. Inside Mitsuda's house, he slept soundly on top of his bed. As his alarm clock went off, the boy opened his eyes wide, all at once. He sat up quickly, throwing off the blanket on him to look at his dot. He had a large scar, right above his heart. He rubbed his, feeling where the spear had pierced him. Phantom pain shot through him as his hand brushed the area. He recoiled and a voice startled him even further. Be careful, you're still hurt. Mitsuda jumped out of his bed and turned to the source of the voice, a Raynare who was beside him in his own bed. Who the hell are you? He asked, pointing accusingly at the intruder. The black dog was between his legs in an instant, despite having not been in the room at all before. It growled ferociously at the Raynare and she, unlike everyone before, locked eyes with the canine and looked semi-afraid. She gulped and spoke back. I'm Ria's Gremory. I found you last night and brought you here to heal you. Ria said, looking apprehensively at the black dog. If it was what she thought it was, the wrong words could get her killed. Mitsuda seemed to consider what she said for a moment, then grit his teeth and started yelling again. Bullshit. I got stabbed in the goddamn heart, you don't just heal from that. I bet you're with a demon chick, aren't you? He yelled, and the more intense he got, the harder the dog growled. Demon chick? Riaz asked, confused. Don't act stupid. Some bitch with wings stabbed in me in the effing yesterday and I wake up with a random person in my bed. How do you even know where I live? Mitsuda yelled. The dog's ferocity reached a peak and it let out a loud, deep, monstrous bark that shook the room they were in. I can answer all your questions, just calm down. Don't tell me to calm down. I fucking died. You don't mid-sentence, Mitsuda screamed and clutched his, and the dog barked again, seeming to grow in size. Mitsuda fell on the floor, writhing. The now larger dog was with him instantly, licking his face in reassurance. Riaz didn't know what to do. She could heal him, but that was only if the dog let her get close. She stepped out of Mitsuda's bed and took a cautious step forward. The dog turned to look at her and then back at Mitsuda as if it was confused about what to do. It went back to licking his face, dismissing Riaz as a threat entirely. She sighed in relief, then kneeled down by Mitsuda. She put her hands on his and Mitsuda clutched her wrists in an instant. Both he and the dog bared their teeth at her, but she kept doing what she was doing. A red magic circle formed in her palm and washed his in bright crimson light. He calmed down and lay still. After a few moments, he opened his eyes again. He stroked his dog's fur but didn't sit up. Sweat glistened on his brow. I hate to say I told you so, but Riaz said, a grin on her face. Mitsuda tiredly smiled back. All the fight had left him. That had been the most intense pain of his life, but Riaz hadn't backed off when he got mad. She was alright, in his book. So, you said you'd answer my questions? He asked, looking her in the eye. She nodded and hummed in the affirmative. Well then, why are we both? Raynare yawned. Her and Issei were on their way to school. You're still tired? Issei asked. We were up a little late. Raynare said, rubbing the back of his hand with her thumb. Oh, right, I can't really remember any of that, sorry, Issei said, trailing off. I didn't expect you to. You were pretty out there. She said, giggling. He smiled at her laugh. The two of them entered the school's gate and almost immediately became the gossip of the year again. People were pointing at Issei and murmuring, suddenly making him very self-conscious. Raynare's hearing quickly picked up on why everyone was talking about him. She frowned. He was not going to be happy. Raynare? What's going on? Issei asked, unsure why he was being talked about with such vigor. At first, he just assumed he had something on his shirt, but a swift check revealed nothing out of the ordinary. Raynare sighed. She wondered if she should tell him or let someone else do it. She decided on the latter. I'm not sure. She said finally. The trio of girls approached the pair, earning a glare from Raynare and confusing Issei. Are you the boy from the video? The girl in the center asked, a brunette with green eyes. Her friends nodded, also wanting the answer. Issei looked lost. Video? What video? He asked, becoming wary. Had he done something stupid last night and someone recorded it? The girls shared a glance and the same one who asked them the question pulled out her smartphone, pulling up a video on YouTube. She handed the phone to Issei, who dropped Raynare's hand to take it. He looked at the phone with Raynare watching closely behind him. The video was titled Boy Sings Beautiful Song to Girlfriend in Restaurant and had several million views. Issei pressed play. The video starts by showing a shot of someone's pants leg, like the recorder is trying to be subtle and hide the camera. As he pulls the camera out and focuses it, however, it reveals a very clear shot of Issei with a guitar, singing to Raynare in Shangri-La. Issei's breath hitched and he nearly dropped the phone. He paused the video without another second of it playing and quickly handed it back to the girl. His face was bright red. That was you, right? You've got a beautiful voice. Do you want to go to karaoke with us sometime? The main girl asked, stepping closer to Issei. Before he could say a word, Raynare moved in between them, giving the girl a hard stare. He's busy that day. Raynare practically snarled, retaking Issei's hand and leading him away from the group of girls. They waved at him, but he was too shell-shocked to notice. Raynare led him to an empty part of the schoolyard where no one could see him. She looked at him, worried. Are you okay, Issei? Raynare, millions of people. I thought I was just singing for you and a few others, but millions of people saw me, he said, sliding down the wall he'd leaned on. Raynare sat down beside him. Issei, you do have an amazing voice. It's not like it's a video of you butchering the song or anything, it's actually an amazing performance. Even as she said the words, Raynare knew that wouldn't be how he saw it. Issei would be embarrassed out of his mind and he'd feel more than slightly betrayed by whoever took the video. What am I gonna do, Issei asked, head in his hands. You'll be fine, Issei. How? How am I gonna be fine? Millions of people saw me sing to you, Raynare. I knew I shouldn't have done it. Raynare sighed. She honest thought it was a good thing that he got a little bit of well-deserved internet fame. It had been a stellar performance and it would be a waste if only 20 or so people got to see it. But he wouldn't get that and she was never good at arguing her point. She'd have to be a little harsh. Issei, look at me. Look at me. Raynare said, poking him in the side. He looked up at her. You're fine. That video is a good thing. Now millions of people have seen how amazing and talented you are. This is just the lucky break you deserve. Raynare said, taking his hands. You could even be a superstar. She said. Issei sighed. She made good points, but he still wasn't happy about the situation. I don't want to be a superstar. He mumbled, looking down. What do you want to be? Raynare asked, tilting her head. She'd never asked what he actually wanted to do. With you. Issei said, looking her in the eyes. Her heart fluttered, but she didn't let it distract her. Even if the words he said made her want to kiss him, she had to say what she wanted to say first. Issei, be serious. This could be really good for you. She said, poking him. He laughed a little. He was very ticklish and she was poking him in just the right spots. I know. You're right, of course. He said, relenting. She huffed. I'm always right, don't forget it. Now get up, let's go to class. Unless you want to stay here and get into some trouble, she said seductively. Issei quickly stood up, offering her his hand. That's what I thought. She said, pulling herself up with his hand. They headed into the school, hand in hand. They were nearly to their class when they were stopped by none other than Sona Citri, flanked by her entire student council. Issei Haidu and Yuumo Mono, please accompany me to the student council office. We have urgent matters to discuss. Sona said, gesturing for the pair to follow her and her cronies. Sure, I really hope this isn't about that video, Issei said. Sona turned around and began to walk to the council room, Issei and Raynare following close behind. The student council walked behind the pair like they were trying to prevent an escape. Nothing so mundane. Although, you do have quite the talent. Sona said, not turning around. Ugh, thanks. Issei said, rubbing his face. They entered the student council room behind Sona, every one of the members taking a seat at the large table with Issei and Raynare standing awkwardly. Sona sat at her desk, her queen behind her. Sona sighed, put her hands on her chin, and started talking. Where were the two of you last night? Sona asked, skipping any exposition. Raynare answered. My boyfriend took me out to a nice restaurant and we came back home. Why? What's this about? She asked, worried something had happened. Issei might not have realized what was happening yet, but Raynare knew. This was an interrogation. Issei, do you know a person by the name Mitsuda Yukaza? Sona asked, light glinting off her glasses. Issei had a confused look on his face. Yeah, that guy's been the bane of my existence for like 4 years. What's going on? Issei asked, unsure. He didn't know what they'd done wrong, if anything, and he'd even remembered to not bring his ring this time. He was murdered last night. Sona said, an edge in her voice. Issei's eyes went wide. Raynare gasped. What? How? Issei stammered. He didn't like Mitsuda, but he definitely didn't want him dead. That's what I want to know from you. More specifically, from her. Sona said accusingly, turning her gaze on Raynare. Me? Raynare asked, shocked. Look, I don't know who killed the kid, but it wasn't me. I was with Issei the entire night. She said, resolute. So, you have no idea who could have done this? Sona asked. The tension in the air was so thick you couldn't cut it with a knife, and it felt like a single wrong word could shatter the room like glass. No. The only other fallen in the city were under Kakabiel's supervision, and he's been reported to Azazel for treason. Raynare answered, unerring. Issei looked back and forth between the two, wondering why Raynare would be accused of doing anything. I believe you. Okay, that's all we need. Riaz, you can come out now. Sona said, looking to a corner of the room. The air near the corner seemed to shimmer and distort and an invisible curtain fell to the ground. From behind it stepped a buxom Redeed, a gorgeous black-haired girl, and Issei's nemesis, all wearing the school uniform. Issei narrowed his eyes at Mitsuda and unconsciously summoned the boosted gear. Raynare stepped back behind him and put her hands up, magic circles spinning in each of her palms. Mitsuda grinned ferociously at the sight of Issei getting ready for a fight, but his eyes went wide when he saw Raynare's magic circles. Before he could say anything, Riaz stepped between Mitsuda and the pair, hiding the bully from their vision. Her eyes were wide and she looked afraid, but the boosted gear wasn't enough to stop her from defending her newest servant. You're the Red Dragon Emperor, Riaz yelled, shocked. Sona had told her Issei wielded an unknown sacred gear, but she never expected him to be a dragon. What the hell is he doing here? Issei yelled to Sona furiously, ignoring Riaz entirely. He thought he'd seen the last of Mitsuda when he'd taught him a lesson in the park. Raynare narrowed her eyes, her glare shifting from devil to devil, looking for answers. She wanted to know what kind of idea it was to not only bring her boyfriend's sole remaining antagonist into the school, but to make him reveal his sacred gear. Please calm down, Haidu. He's non-hostile, and I ask that you remain the same. Sona said in a diplomatic voice. She was more than a little frightened now that she knew who Issei really was. Boost. Last time we met, he tried to kill me. Non-hostile my ass. Issei yelled, pointing his gauntleted hand at the bald boy. The Redeed, who Issei assumed was Ria's, narrowed her eyes at him. I assure you, my servant harbors no ill will toward you. Now, put your gear away and have your pet stand down before things get violent. Ria said, trying to command Issei. Everyone was quiet for a moment while Issei grit his teeth. Did you just call her my pet? Boost. There was a fire in Issei's eyes and he looked livid. Raynare wanted to swoon at his defense of her, but there were more pressing matters. Being a pet is all you disgusting fallen are good for. The black-haired girl spat at Raynare, lightning gathering in her hands. Mitsuda looked to the people getting ready for a fight around him and suddenly his dog was at his feet. Take it back. Issei said, calmly. Far too calmly for the situation. He looked at the black-haired girl, who sneered back. Mitsuda spoke up. If you want to fight again, it won't go your way this time. I'm back in black, wimp. Mitsuda said, grinning. The black dog at his side suddenly turned into something like a living shadow and wrapped around Mitsuda's hand in the shape of pitch-black spiked brass knuckles. Mitsuda rubbed the spikes, readying himself. I said, take it back. Issei said yelled, reaching the limit of his patience. Boost. His gear shone brightly in the dim light of the room and the green gems gleamed. Everyone, calm down now. Sona screamed at the top of her lungs, shocking everyone. Everyone was quiet for a second and soon, all the party's magic circles started to disperse. Issei and Mitsuda were the last to disarm, sharing one last glare before unequipping their gears. Issei's gauntlet disappeared and Mitsuda's knuckles shifted back into a dog. Rias, you and your queen are acting like children. Apologize to Haidu and Amano this instant. Sona said, standing and pointing at the Redeed. We do have first names, you know Raynare thought, weirded out by being called Amano. Rias sighed. She took a moment to consider, then spoke to Issei again. I apologize for the actions of myself and my queen. Forgive me. She said, bowing to Issei. Issei sighed too. Whatever. It's not me you need to apologize to, anyway. He looked to Raynare. The fallen angel looked to Rias and tilted her head, awaiting an apology. Rias bit her lip. The black-haired girl looked extremely apprehensive at the thought of her master giving an apology to a fallen, but didn't say anything. I'm sorry, Angel. Sorry, I don't know your name. Rias said. Raynare spoke back to her. Yuma Amano. Don't forget it. She gave the devils her fake name, since only a handful of people knew her real one. There. Now that we're settled, can we talk like civilized people? Sona asked the room, annoyed. After everyone present gave a tentative nod, she continued. Mitsuda there was killed last night by an unknown fallen angel with blue hair. We were hoping you could identify the killer. Sona said, sitting back down at her desk and talking to Raynare. The only blue-haired fallen I know is Raynare, who should have left when Kakabiel was arrested. I don't know why she'd kill anyone, though. Raynare answered, not skipping a beat. Sona nodded. That's good to know. We can't do much with that information, but it's good to have nonetheless. Now. I'm sorry, but I've gotta ask. You keep saying Mitsuda was killed yesterday, so why is he right there? Shouldn't he be, I don't know, dead? Issei asked, interrupting Sona. His patience for things not making sense was at an end. Mitsuda smirked. Wouldn't you love that, shrimp? Sorry, but I'm not just alive, I got an upgrade. Check it. He said, and 2 bat wings unfurled from his back. Issei's eyes went wide. Wait, are you a devil? How? Issei asked, flabbergasted. Sona interjected again. Were you unaware of the evil P system, Haidu? She asked, looking at Issei. The what? Issei asked, not knowing what she was talking about. Sona looked at him blankly for a moment, as if evaluating the truth of his question. Very well, I'll explain. Devils can reincarnate other living beings into a member of our species by using an item called an evil piece. This reincarnation extends to the recently deceased as well. So, when Mitsuda was killed yesterday, Rias used some of her evil pieces to reincarnate him as a member of her peerage. Does that answer your question? Sona explained, not stopping for a moment. I think so, Issei said, scratching his head. He didn't really get it at all. I or your mate will explain later, don't worry. It's time one of us explain things to you, anyway. Okay. That sounds like a good idea. Issei thought, thankful for Drake's promise. Oh. How could I forget? I don't think you've all been properly introduced. I suppose we should do that before we move on. Haidu, this is Ria's Gremory, heir to the pillar family of the Gremory, and her queen Akeno Himejima. You've met her newest family member, so I don't think I need to introduce you. Issei gave the 2 girls a half-hearted wave at Sona's introduction. He didn't have a very good first impression of them so far. Rias, Akeno, this is Issei Haidu and Yuma Amano. Haidu is the Red Dragon Emperor, apparently, as well as the holder of the Ring of Solomon, and Amano is a fallen angel in the service of Azazel. Riaz and Akeno gave Issei a wave back, but barely even acknowledged the fallen. Now, with that out of the way, here's the situation. We've got one or more potentially hostile fallen active in this town, killing anyone they deem a threat. This is a problem for everyone here, including you too. If they truly are under Kakabiel's command and he has in fact betrayed your faction, it's highly possible that you're their next target. I'd request that, for a while, you coordinate with us to resolve the threat. Sona said calmly. And what exactly would you mean by that? Raynare asked. Sona was right, they were definitely on Kakabiel's hit list, but she didn't know if she wanted to hunt her fellow fallen. What I mean is, you should assist our peerages in assessment and removal of the enemy. If you really were sent by Azazel to foster relations, I believe this is a good first step. What do you say? Sona asked, tilting her head. Issei looked to Raynare, who shrugged. He bit his lip and considered his options for a moment. We'll help you. Issei said. Excellent. We should start by Sona began, only to be stopped. On one condition. Issei interrupted, holding up his index finger. And what might that be? Sona asked, hesitant. Everyone looked at him, awaiting his next words. I want him. Issei pointed at Mitsuda, who raised his head. What's my servant got to do? Riaz started in her pompous voice, before Issei once again interrupted. To apologize. All the shit he's given me, all the times he's hurt me, all the times he's made me want to die. I want him to apologize for it. Issei started quietly, his voice rising with every accusation. Why the hell should I? Mitsuda snarled, his dog growling. Riaz considered Issei's words for a moment. The cooperation of the Red Dragon would be invaluable in ridding the town of the fallen, especially if Kakabiel himself were to attack. They needed him. Mitsuda, please apologize. Riaz said in a no-buts voice. What? Like hell. Mitsuda started. Do it. Riaz yelled, at her wit's end. She didn't like forcing her newest servant to do something he didn't want to do, but they really didn't have a choice. TCH. Fine. Mitsuda said. He crossed the room and walked over to Issei, stopping about 2 feet in front of him. He extended his hand to shake with Issei. I'm sorry. He managed to say. Good. Issei replied, shaking his hand. Neither of them crushed the other's hand, though both wanted to. Mitsuda returned to Ria's side. So, we're all in agreement. Excellent. Now, a good start would be to identify who we're dealing with. If it is the Angel Calwarner, like Amano said, then we'll know for sure this is Kakabiel's doing. We should also set about locating the Fallen's area of operation. Anyone have any input? Sona asked, looking around the room. Yeah. Raynare said. Everyone looked at her. I know where they were located, though I don't know if they're still there. Sona nodded at her, gesturing for Raynare to keep going. The abandoned church, on the edge of town. There were 3 angels there. Calwarner, Middled, and Donaseek. All with 2 wings and all under Kakabiel, who wasn't actually there. Raynare said, explaining. How do you know all that? Riaz asked, narrowing her eyes. Because I was there on Azazel's orders, keeping an eye on them and making sure they didn't do anything to start a war. Raynare lied. She didn't want Issei to know that she too was meant to be one of the killers. Is that okay with you, Your Highness? Raynare said mockingly, making Riaz angry. She did not like the Redeed's attitude, acting like she was better than everyone present and talking about her servants like they were a pair of shoes. It ticked Raynare off to no end, and it bothered Issei too. They shared a glance, Issei snorting a laugh at the way Raynare called out Riaz. Riaz and her queen had angry expressions, but Mitsuda thought it was pretty funny too. He found himself stifling a laugh, earning him an angry glare from Riaz. Well then. I believe that's enough for today. We'll give you our contact information, and I ask that you do the same. That way, we can get in touch if something comes up. Any questions? Sona asked. No one said anything. Good. Then, I believe I've kept you all away from your classes long enough. After finishing up, Issei and Raynare left the room, heading to class. Several members of the student council filtered out behind them, also heading to their classes. After everyone was out, Sona stood up from her desk. She crossed the room, walking up to Riaz with an angry expression. Sona, what's? Riaz was silenced by a harsh slap to the face. Ria's hand went to her cheek as she looked at Sona in disbelief. Mitsuda and Akeno looked confused, but also ready to move at a moment's notice. Riaz. I don't know if you forgot, but that boy that you just insulted has, in his possession, a ring that could make us kill ourselves at the snap of a finger. Not to mention, he's literally the damn Red Dragon. And you just called the girl he loves a pet and insulted him ever further than you already had by suggesting you're better than him. Are you stupid? Sona yelled at Riaz, who had a dumbfounded expression on her face. She'd heard Sona yell 2 or 3 times, but she'd never heard the girl curse before. Sona, I. No Riaz. you need to lose your prissy attitude. If we want to work with him on this, you need to stop acting like a brat and be mature for once." Sona's face was red and her knuckles were white. Riaz realized the girl was scared. The more she thought about it, the more she realized Sona was right to be scared, too. If Issei had really wanted it, they'd all be dead, or worse. Riaz hung her head. Sona sighed and returned to her desk. "I'd advise all of you to avoid antagonizing our newest comrade and do not by any means do anything to hurt or anger his girlfriend. She seems to be a trigger for him and doing something to her could bring him crashing down on us. I'd like to see him try. With my new powers, he wouldn't stand a chance against me," Mitsuda said, stroking his dog's fur. Sona grit her teeth. "Mitsuda, yours is a low-tier longinus. Issei's is a mid to high tier and he has the Ring of Solomon. He would be deadly to you," Sona said matter-of-factly. Mitsuda made a tch sound and turned away. He'd get Haidu, one way or another, ring or no ring. Issei sat in his last class, Raynare sleeping in her desk behind him. How she managed to get a desk behind him in every one of their classes, he'd never figure out. It was like magic. The teacher talked and talked, but Issei was absorbing none of the information. He was worried about Mitsuda. He'd apologized, yes, and they were meant to be working together, but Issei couldn't shake the feeling that Mitsuda would be a foe soon enough. He hoped that wasn't the case. After school, as Raynare and Issei walked home, Issei sent Yoshikage a text saying they were done with school and ready to come to the station, but they needed a ride. Yoshikage replied within moments, saying that he'd be more than happy to give them a ride. About 15 minutes later, they were in Yoshi's car, well on their way to the station. "So, how are you two doing? Did you enjoy your date last night?" Yoshi asked, looking at the pair from the rearview mirror. "It was a blast," Raynare said, smiling. "Yeah, I bet. The mayor invited me to eat with her at Shangri-La one time and I'll never forget it. That place is one of Kuo's best kept secrets." "It's pretty great," Issei said, absent-mindedly. What he was really thinking about was what he was going to get as his step-parents' inheritance. They still had all his things from his real parents, as well as some other stuff he wouldn't mind having. Well, here we are. I'll walk you two inside, take you to the guy, and when you're all done I'll take you home." "Cool. Cool," Issei and Raynare said in unison, both amused at the man's upbeat attitude. "Great," Yoshikage exclaimed, giving them a thumbs up. About 4 hours later, Issei and Raynare walked out of the police station and both had bags under their eyes and disheveled hair. The main Issei had to talk to, a lawyer named Shiro, had just talked and talked and talked. Issei had to sign paper after paper to finally get everything taken care of, but he managed it. He'd come away from everything with even more money than Yoshikage had originally stated, since his step-parents had a bunch of money in alternate accounts and stocks and such. After everything was said and done, Issei had roughly 2 billion yen, making him quite possibly the right teenager in Japan. And 2 billion yen equals about 18.2 million United States dollars for all you American readers. Issei was ecstatic at the amount, and that wasn't even counting the 2 houses and 4 cars that he owned. He decided to sell both houses and 3 of the cars, but he left that to Shiro, since Issei knew nothing about how to sell something like that. Shiro said he'd do it through the bank and just have the money transferred into Issei's now massive bank account. All his possessions were still in his step-parents' main house and were to be shipped to his new place as soon as the police determine it's no longer a crime scene, which would only be a day or two since the culprit had confessed before killing herself. The only thing he wouldn't get to keep was the sword his stepmom had used for the crime, since it was now a murder weapon. Yoshikage was waiting for them outside, his car ready. They got in and conversed tiredly with the excited police officer for a while as he drove them home. As the pair arrived at their house, they thanked Yoshikage for the ride and went inside. They were both exhausted from the lengthy chat with the lawyer and neither felt like doing much. "Are you watching anime?" Raynare asked Issei as they entered their penthouse. The question surprised him. No. My step-parents were extremely strict on what I could and couldn't watch, and anime wasn't one of the colds. "I didn't think you did either, honestly," Issei said. He did not take Raynare for the kind of person to watch anime. "I'm full of surprises, aren't I? Let's watch some anime," Raynare said, pulling Issei to their couch. They sat together under a throw blanket while Raynare searched for something good to watch on Hulu. "This should be something good to start on, I think. It's one of my favorites," Raynare said, selecting an anime. "Tokyo Ghoul. Is it good?" Issei asked. He'd never heard of it before, but he was open to it if Raynare liked it. "It's great. Should be perfect for a sheltered kid like yourself," Raynare said, grinning evilly. Tokyo Ghoul was one of her favorites, but it would not be good to start off on for Issei, not at all. He was in for a shock. "What's it about?" Issei asked. Raynare had skipped through the menus fast enough that Issei wasn't able to read the description of the show. It's a really happy story about Kaneki Ken, a Japanese teenager going through some changes in his body. You love it? Raynare said. Sounds a little weird, but okay. Issei said. Raynare started the episode. Thanks for watching this video. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe and comment down below and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support and follow the Belial the Liar for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story link in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.